We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
And Wembley winners. England beat the Republic of Ireland 5-0 to win promotion in the Nations League. A very good morning to you. The US government says it will allow Ukraine to use American long-range missiles to carry out limited strikes against targets inside Russia. It's expected that the UK will do the same, but there hasn't been any official response from the Prime Minister on that topic, who's in Rio, of course, for the G20 summit. We'll be putting it to the government in about 10 minutes' time. But first, let's speak to our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey. I'm delighted to say joins us from Kyiv this morning. Stuart, is this seen as a game-changing moment for Ukraine?
Well, it's interesting because analysts, defence analysts, are saying that it's not necessarily game-changing. I'm not so certain in terms of morale and ability for the Ukrainian military. I think it is a really significant development. Being able to attack long range into Russia is what they have been asking for a very long time now. America has finally given permission. I think Britain and France will do so immediately as well, because they've already been saying we should be allowing it to happen. We know in this first instance it's going to be focusing particularly on the Kursk region and North Korean soldiers who are supporting Russian soldiers in their attempts to take back this territory, which Ukraine invaded in the summer and has been holding ever since. As many as 50,000 soldiers are being gathered there, and these long-range weapons allow the Ukrainians to target the places that they're staying in, their ammunition depots far inside Russia, which have been positioned there well back from the front line, exactly because the Russians knew that the Ukrainians couldn't hit them. So I think it is a big development, a major move for the United States, being criticised here a lot because of prevarication. There is a sense amongst Ukrainian people that the Western allies are happy enough to help Ukraine sort of survive but not win. And that all of society feels this, that they're just not given enough of anything to actually crush the Russian invasion into Ukraine proper and to push them back. It's sort of the West, they feel, allows it to be held in a sort of status quo. This perhaps allows them to attack further into Russia. Now, of course, one of the reasons why this permission hasn't been given is the threats of a massive escalation, which President Putin has indicated would happen. He would see this as effectively a NATO attack on Russia. All sorts of rules could be changed. Attacks could take place against NATO countries. That's the fear, at least. Others think that that's overblown. But anyway, that's one of the reasons why President Biden has been reticent in allowing permission for these weapons to be used. So I think it is significant. President Zelensky didn't actually say permission being given, but he indicated that missiles will do the talking for him. So I think that is pretty much what he was saying. And when those attacks happen, well, we don't know, but there is a suspicion it'll be pretty soon.
Well, I was going to pick up on that. Is that the expectation, that these missiles could be deployed very soon indeed? And is there also a fear, a sense that this permission might expire come Inauguration Day?
Well, it could easily expire, couldn't it? Because we don't know what Donald Trump's position on this. His son has come out and said, you know, the military establishment is basically wanting to create World War III, where his father could bring about peace. President Trump in the future has said that he will get negotiations and talks and he'll end it in a single day, is how he put it. And so he may be against this. I think he possibly will be. His natural inclination will always be to go against what the previous administration has done. But I think with the weapons themselves, I think they will be used fairly quickly, because we know from our own contacts within the Ukraine military in the last few days, there have been concerted efforts by the Russian forces to attack Ukrainian positions. So those weapons are already needed, and I suspect that they will use them very soon indeed.
Stuart Ramsey, as always, thanks so much for us live in Kyiv this morning. Let's get Mari's take in terms of what this all means for the UK. As Stuart was suggesting, this is something the UK, across both of the two recent premierships, have been pushing for. So the assumption, therefore, is that British permissions will follow suit fairly swiftly.
Yeah, that is the assumption. But when you speak to government, you speak to the MOD, you speak to Number 10, they are all saying no comment for now. I think realistically that will shift once we have the official confirmation come out of the White House. Then I assume that will follow. But until that is coming, Number 10 is being very, very cautious not to officially say anything. So I think it'll be interesting to see if that comes out today. And also it'd be interesting to see if France also does the same as well. We know Macron's been calling for this, but we've got Keir Starmer in Rio today for the G20, and he's talking about Ukraine in some of his words that have been given. He says, as we mark 1,000 days since Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, I'll be doing all I can to bolster Ukraine as they continue to bravely defend their sovereignty. And also, we're told that he's going to be urging G20 countries to go further and faster in their support for Ukraine, specifically highlighting the unfathomable consequences, he says, if Putin does succeed. So realistically, that is going to be very high up on the agenda at the G20. And then the other interesting moment that I think will be happening today is Keir Starmer meeting with President Xi Jinping of China, the first meeting between a UK and Chinese leader for 6 years. And that will be really interesting to see how that bilateral meeting goes. We know it's quite controversial in terms of how controversial a relationship with China can be. China hawks will realistically be up in arms, as they tend to be, about any perceived idea of kind of softening or closening of a relationship with China. But what the lines from Number 10 are is essentially this is pragmatism. This is a way of Keir Starmer being practical and pragmatic about our relationship with China and how we can work toward a better relationship, even if we don't see eye to eye on many areas.
Of course, it does come after President Biden met Xi Jinping over the weekend before announcing this decision on Russian missiles, which I'm sure was no surprise, not least because he met Xi at the APEC summit rather than waiting for the G20. Lots to discuss throughout the day on this topic. It's the topic of the day, of course. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, joins us at 7:15. We have the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartlidge, coming up at 8:15, and Peter Westmacott, of course, the former ambassador to the US, coming up as well at 9:30 to discuss all of these foreign policy developments. For now, Mari, thank you so much. Now, strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police except as a last resort, following an independent review into the force's treatment of women and girls in police custody. The Dame Vera Baird inquiry was commissioned after a Sky News investigation revealed a series of harrowing stories of women being mistreated by officers. 24 of the 26 recommendations made to Greater Manchester Police have been implemented. That includes an end to so-called welfare strip searches, plus the establishment of an independent scrutiny panel to look at arrests and custody records, and appointing a new super-independent custody visitor to make unannounced visits. Well, our home editor, Jason Farrell's here with me, of course, has led the reporting on this throughout. Jason, good morning to you. So the headline of such a large number of these recommendations being implemented, but still a couple that aren't?
Well, I think, these are good. It's great that they've made these recommendations, but there remains a big question, I think, over the complaints system. And I want to tell you about Sophie's story. She was one of the complainants in the Bard Review. She was arrested at 3 a.m. in the morning by a lot of police officers. She was detained for 11 hours over allegations made by her domestic abuser that she had broken his wing mirror and that she had caused bruising to his arm at the time when he had strangled her. And the justification for her arrest and detainment was to protect a vulnerable person, i.e. the abuser. Let's hear what Sophie has to say about it.
He's got a history of domestic violence. He's got a history of being incarcerated. They knew what I'd gone through. They knew what I was trying to protect myself from. I was in regular contact with domestic violence support workers who were meeting with police liaison. They knew that I'd had the locks changed. They knew I had an alert on the house and my phone.
So Sophie believes that the partner was using the police as part of his coercion to get her to drop the charges against him. Dame Vera agreed. She said the arrest was unlawful. And here's what the Chief Constable, Stephen Watson, said at the time of the report being published.
The police are being used by a domestic abuser to abuse that woman. That's what happened, isn't it? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm appalled by it. I'm appalled by it. I am a professional police officer, and I am surrounded by thousands of good police officers who will simply and similarly be appalled.
There were a lot of people involved in that arrest, and they all got it wrong.
Indeed. It's a systemic failure, a leadership failure, a process failure. I do think in individual circumstances there may be a failure of experience.
And yet, a month later, after Stephen Watson has said that, when she goes through the complaint system, they come back and say there were sufficient grounds for your arrest and that the service you received was acceptable. So that's why, and a lot of the other victims we've spoken to feel they're really being held up by the complaint system. Now, they did, after they realised that she was a bad victim, apologise. They said the service that she received wasn't acceptable. And they've given us a statement saying that complaints relating to the Baird Review, including Sophie's, are subject to fair and thorough examination without fear or favour by our Professional Standards Directorate. Where an investigation finds there to be a case to answer, we will ensure officers face disciplinary proceedings, and we're working hard to ensure that people of Greater Manchester Police, particularly women and girls, can have confidence in their police force. But I think that's now where the focus needs to be, trying to sort out the complaint system so that people can have confidence in that.
Jason, as ever, great stuff on this story. And I know, Jason, you're going to be back with us later as well. We'll be speaking to Dame Vera Baird and to the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Now, time for all of the day's other top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thanks so much, Wilfred. Detectives investigating the murder of a woman whose body was found in a car boot have launched an international manhunt to find her husband. Ashita Rella was found dead in Ilford in East London. This was on Thursday, hours after someone in her hometown of Corby phoned officers with concerns about her welfare. Well, this is the man wanted over the death. Pankaj Lamba, it's suspected he's fled the country. Police are urging anyone with information to come forward. Vulnerable young people are being placed in illegal and unsafe accommodations, such as caravans and Airbnbs, according to a new report into the social care system. Parliament will today consider new measures to stop companies running children's homes from making excessive profits. Now, quick question. Could it be finally time to get your woolly jumper out as an Arctic blast is set to hit parts of the UK this week? Snow and ice warnings are in place for northern Scotland this morning, and the Met Office has issued another warning for parts of northern England and southern Scotland from tonight. Australian senators have voted to censor Aboriginal colleague of theirs, Lydia Thorpe, after her protest in front of the King. This was last month. Now, Thorpe shouted, "You're not my king." This was during a reception in Canberra for the King. The censor described Thorpe's actions as disrespectful and disruptive. This was her reaction.
Censure motion is like that to me. I don't give a damn about censure motion. In fact, I'm going to use it for kindling, and I'm proud that I stood up against the king coloniser.
Masked burglars have reportedly stolen a quad bike and pickup truck from the Windsor Castle estate. Now, the Sun newspaper is reporting that the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children were sleeping nearby at the time. Let's get more details now. Saba's here this morning. Morning, Saba. So what are we hearing?
So this is, firstly, a surprising story, given the level of security you'd expect at a place like Windsor Castle. Now, it's being reported in the Sun newspaper this morning that two men scaled a 6-foot fence in the evening of October the 13th, and that they broke through a security gate using a stolen truck. Now, it's understood that the King himself was not in residence at the time, but that the Prince and Princess of Wales, alongside their 3 children, were sleeping close by, which is, of course, concerning for any family. Now, in a statement to the Sun newspaper, Thames Valley Police have said that around 11:45 p.m. on Sunday, October the 13th, we received a report of burglary at a property on the Crown Estate land near to the A308 in Windsor. Offenders entered a farm building and made off with a black Isuzu pickup and a red quad bike. They then made off towards the Old Windsor and Datchet area. Now, the Sun have said, or rather the police have said to the Sun, that so far no arrests have been made, but an investigation into this case is ongoing.
Sab, great stuff, thank you. Now, a mother whose council flat in East London is full of damp and mould says her home is making her children ill. Sky's Becky Johnson has this report.
This is Waltham Forest in East London, a place with one of the longest waiting lists for council housing in the country. Thousands are desperate for a flat in blocks like these. But we've been inside and found a snapshot of Britain's housing crisis.
You don't want to touch the damp?
It's cold and mouldy in this flat. The damage has been caused by a persistent leak. It's been like this for 8 years.
That is the girls' room. At the bottom is all mouldy. So the paint has come off. We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
For years, they've been begging the council to fix it. Life like this is all her daughters can remember.
They grow up watching this grow with them as well. Do you know how sad that is?
I can't breathe that much.
Since a baby?
Yeah, since a baby.
They want us to live in hell, that's what it is. They want us to live in misery.
That's how Ahmed felt too when water poured in through his ceiling on and off for a year.
Just coming out of these areas here, just completely seeping out, and it would come directly down to the switches. So switching it on was just a complete hazard.
An NHS worker, Andrea, who's disabled, sometimes struggles to get to her flat on the 11th floor.
The lifts is the biggest nightmare. I've had to spend a couple of nights not here because I couldn't get in there.
How often do they break down?
Too often.
Earlier this year, flammable cladding was removed from the buildings, but it hasn't yet been replaced, so they've been left with no insulation.
It's freezing, you know. So throughout Christmas, we're just, you know, literally left to freeze. The scariest winter we're going to have to go through living in these buildings.
Balcony walls have had to be removed too. Some, like Steve on the 5th floor, have been left with just a flimsy barrier.
Are you worried about your children when they're out on the balcony?
Well, definitely, I can't let them come out here. This is a no-go.
Waltham Forest Council insists the work is being carried out safely. They are, however, unable to say when the buildings will be re-insulated. They say they respond to concerns in a timely manner and they apologise to Faz, saying they'll arrange an urgent inspection of her flat.
I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my 2 girls. Then I feel like maybe they will take this serious.
The government has made social house building a key priority, but the experience of people here raises questions about whether existing homes are fit for purpose. Becky Johnson, Sky News, East London.
Well, time now to speak to the government, and I'm delighted to say that joining me now is the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. Good morning, Minister. Thanks so much for joining us. Want to get to what you're announcing in your department in a moment, but first of all, the news that President Biden has authorised Ukraine to use American-made missiles into Russian territory. Can we expect a similar permission from the Prime Minister relating to UK-made weapons soon?
Good morning. We remain steadfast in our support to the Ukrainian people. Almost 1,000 days into this conflict, they've suffered unimaginable hardship and loss and have made extraordinary sacrifice. You'll appreciate that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will always keep under review what the Ukrainian people and their military require. And going into the G20, the Prime Minister has set out very clearly that the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have our full backing. That's always been on a cross-party basis in Parliament, and that's the approach we've taken from government to continue that approach.
In terms of whether it's likely to come immediately or not, I mean, has this been discussed at Cabinet?
You'll appreciate I can't comment on those kinds of discussions, but as I say, the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will always keep under review what the Ukrainian government ask of us by way of support. We have provided considerable military assistance to the Ukrainian people in their fight against that terrible Russian aggression that we have seen. And as we come up to that 1,000 days of the conflict, it's more stark than ever what the Ukrainian people have had to go through.
I guess the only added point is that the UK for some time, both under the previous Premiership and under your own Premiership, has been looking to grant this permission, and the hold-up, as we were led to believe, was the US. So with that hold-up removed, is it fair to expect that British permission will be forthcoming too?
As I say, I'm not seeking to be difficult here, but these are sensitive matters that are rightly kept under review by the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary. And going into the G20, What the Prime Minister has said is that we continue to back the Ukrainian people. That was the approach taken by the last government. It is the approach that we have continued to take. And I think it's right that we as a nation stand behind the Ukrainian people in their hour of need.
I guess even regardless of what happens on the British permission, I wonder whether this is a victory of British diplomacy. It's something that, you know, the US election date is probably a factor here, but I wonder whether the UK election date is. Is this something that Keir Starmer and David Lammy has convinced President Biden to do, where Rishi Sunak and his administration failed?
Without commenting on the specific case here, what I would say is that we have consistently pushed for more support for Ukraine. But, you know, credit to the previous Conservative government. They did the same. They had our full backing when they did so.
Let's touch on China as well. The Prime Minister is saying today that he's seeking a serious and pragmatic relationship with China. What does that mean?
Well, China are a major player, both in terms of the economy, but also in the Security Council. So it's right that we have that engagement, but that we do so on a pragmatic basis where we go into it with our eyes wide open. That does mean there will be challenge, constructive challenge, and there will be areas of profound disagreement.
If the US wanted you to be tougher on China, would you listen to them?
You know, you'll appreciate I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals as to what might or might not happen into the future. We
It's
need
a likely
to maintain.
thing to emerge. I would imagine there'll be these sorts of things in the next couple of years.
We will always have our clear starting position, and for example, through our engagement with China, the Foreign Secretary has made clear our concerns around human rights abuses, for example. But we do have to have a process of engaging with other nations, China included, and going into the G20. That's what the Prime Minister has set out.
Let's get to your brief. Apologies for taking a little while to get here. There was a lot of big international news to touch on. What are you announcing today?
So what I'm setting out today is the biggest reform of children's social care in a generation. Far too many very vulnerable children are being failed by a system that just isn't working for them. We've seen ever-increasing spend on crisis-level intervention, but alongside that, some really terrible outcomes for amongst the most vulnerable children in our country. So what I'm setting out today is that firstly, we will do more to make sure that children can remain within family support networks wherever possible, and we put more investment in the budget into that. But where it isn't possible and where children do require a children's social care placement, we will crack down on the excess profiteering that we've seen in recent years and the poor quality placements, the unregulated placements, and make sure that we're taking more action there. But we've got to change the system so that there is more put in place earlier to help families to avoid storing up these big problems for the future.
How will you make the difference, decide the difference between a normal profit in running a private business and profiteering?
So what we will do, first of all, is bring in a financial oversight mechanism so we've got better visibility about what's going on, because at the moment we just don't have that. But you have some private providers who are securing 20 to 30% profits. And, you know, this is off the backs of very vulnerable children who've been through often amongst the most traumatic experiences you can imagine, who've experienced real problems within their families that have got them to that point. And I just think it is completely unacceptable to see that level of profit. Now, if providers don't respond, if they don't bring down those costs, then we will act to cap their profits. And I serve notice on them today that we will not hesitate to take the necessary action to make sure that we are getting much, much better outcomes for children in our country. There has been a failure over many, many years. The costs have continued to spiral. But more importantly, outcomes for children are just not good enough.
Should it be provided by the state? Would that be the simplest solution to this?
Well, we are providing more backing for state provision, for councils to either provide it directly or to work with others to do that with a £90 million investment and with wider changes in regulation to make that easier. But we are where we are in terms of we have private providers within the system, so there is a balance to strike. But where it comes to excess profiteering around vulnerable children, we've got to draw a line under this, and we will be setting out further plans today in Parliament about how we will make that happen.
Just finally, Minister, I wanted to ask you about the assisted dying bill. In 2015, you voted against the bill as it was then. How are you thinking of voting this time around?
As you'll know, the government doesn't take a position on this. It remains neutral. It's for individual members of Parliament to decide what they believe to be best. This is a very sensitive issue. It's difficult for everyone. As you say, back in 2015, I voted against that legislation, and I haven't changed my mind.
If there were different provisions in the bill, is this something that you're kind of against ideologically on principle, or does the bill just not go further enough to offset some of your concerns?
I think all of us weigh up the They're very strongly held views on both sides, and often they're very passionate and quite understandable reasons that people set out their position around changing the law. I continue to think about this deeply, but my position hasn't changed since 2015.
Minister, thanks so much for joining us. Very good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll be hearing from Dame Vera Baird after a review into inappropriate strip searches led to change within Greater Manchester Police. We'll also be discussing how Joe Biden's move to lift a ban on Ukraine using US weapons to strike deeper into Russia will impact the war. We'll speak to military analyst Simon Diggins. And travel advice from the AA as parts of the country prepare for icy weather. We'll be right back.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll be speaking to Dame Vera Baird on changes being made by Greater Manchester Police to protect women. But first of all, a reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got those.
Thank you, Wilfred. US President Joe Biden has lifted restrictions on Ukraine, prohibiting the use of American long-range missiles to strike deeper inside Russia. It's expected that the UK will do the same, but there hasn't been official confirmation from Downing Street just yet. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says that support for Ukraine is the #1 priority at the G20 summit in Rio. He'll also be speaking to Chinese President Xi Jinping in Brazil today. It will be the first meeting between a British Prime Minister and Chinese leader in more than half a decade. Strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police except as a last resort. This is following an independent review into the force's treatment of women and girls in police custody, all triggered, of course, by a Sky News investigation. And masked burglars have reportedly stolen a quad bike and a pickup truck from the Windsor Castle estate by scaling a 6-foot fence. Now, the theft happened last month while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children were sleeping nearby.
Leah, thanks so much. Well, as you can see, Jason says, because in just a moment we're going to be talking to Dame Vera Baird. But before we do, whilst we just wait for that connection, Mari's here as well. Mari, in terms of the interview we just did with Bridget Phillipson, I guess it hints at perhaps a decision coming later today on UK weapons to Ukraine. I sort of see it the other way around now. If we don't get an announcement whilst the Prime Minister's at the G20, perhaps then we'll be surprised.
Yeah, I think it did feel that, you know, she was essentially there to kind of hold the line. She wasn't trying to give away anything, but the thing that she continued to kind of reiterate was how staunch the UK support for Ukraine was. And I think, therefore, she was there really just to kind of hold the line and wait until the PM is ready to give that announcement. I think, realistically, that's what it feels like to me, anyway. And then just quickly on China, you were asking her about China and that controversial bilateral meeting between Starmer and Xi Jinping. And she did say, you know, there's going to be constructive challenge and areas of disagreement. So the government are really trying to make sure that they are demonstrating they are not shying away from areas in which we do not see eye to eye with China, and there are difficulties with our relationship with China, and they are not trying to kind of smooth over that. They are very kind of going into that meeting really almost eyes wide open to our relationship with China, but nonetheless still arguing for the benefit of that kind of meeting.
Right, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. Well, at 8:15 we'll be speaking to James Cartlidge, the Shadow Defence Secretary. Now, Greater Manchester Police will now only strip search women in custody as a last resort after a Sky News investigation uncovered mistreatment by officers. It led to an inquiry into the custodial practices of the force by Dame Vera Baird. And I'm delighted to say that she joins us now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us, Dame Vera. 24 of 26 of your recommendations have been implemented. Is that cause for celebration, or are you focused on the areas that haven't yet been implemented?
Well, I think that's a very fair question, but 26 out of 28 is not bad. What is important is that, OK, that training has been carried out, that change of policy has been made, but will it last? Has it found its way into the fibre of this police force, which was doing so poorly with women so recently? What is particularly impressive on top of that, in my view, is that the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and his deputy, Kate Green, are setting up what I recommended, which is a scrutiny panel to meet and at random to take on arrests, how they've been done, any strip searches, whether they've been done, why they've been done, and to look into all the areas that the chapters of my inquiry found deficient. This panel, I've not yet met them. I'm meeting them early December, but they're drawn, I believe, from a really wide range of people, victims, organisations, lawyers, other people from the criminal justice system, probation, and they're going to scrutinise deeply to make sure that this is not just 26 out of 28 boxes ticked, but real change.
Dave Vera, it's Jason Farrell here. We featured Sophie's story this morning, which you know very well, a woman, a domestic violence victim who was arrested by police after allegations made by her abusive partner. We've also seen that, you know, at the time that she complained about it, she was told that there was nothing wrong with what had happened, even that after your review criticised what had happened to her. What do you think about that? You know that story very well.
Yes, I mean, that was an appalling arrest, totally unnecessary and therefore unlawful, made of a respectable professional woman at 3 a.m. because a man who tried to strangle her only 2 months ago made a counter-allegation that 15 months before she'd knocked the wing mirror off his car, committing a crime. That her complaint, which it's right to say was rejected by Greater Manchester Police about a month after my report was published, that it was rejected in what is, frankly, obviously she sent it to me, you know, a rather perverse way of setting out a small number of the facts and drawing the inevitable conclusion from this process that the police were absolutely right. That is why I am so pleased that Andy Burnham is going to have a scrutiny panel to look and see how complaints are being done now. Have we made a change? Was this the old regime and now we can look forward to some sunny uplands, or are we no better than we were before? I must say I feel positive because the Chief Constable himself was profoundly critical of the way this complaint had been managed. And it is, you know, inevitably the case, isn't it, with a huge organisation like the second biggest force in the country, that it takes a while for stuff to seep through. And I'm just impressed and pleased, because I recommended it, that the mayoralty is going to drive it through.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be pleased about by what's come out from the mayor's report on this. But are you concerned about the complaint system itself? Because it's not just Sophie's case, is it? There's a number of the people who've been part of your review who found themselves incredibly frustrated. And there won't always be yourself or I there to kind of scrutinise. I know you've got to say there's a scrutiny panel, but the complaint system itself just seems to have an opaque lack of independence about it, with police often are still marking their own homework.
They are still marking their own homework. I don't like it one bit. It is what that has always held back fresh eyes on police complaints. Is firstly they go, I mean, as is the case, if you complain about a shop, it goes to the shop first and they see what happens. But there's usually an independent mechanism to follow if they just back themselves up, as is often the practice. The independent mechanism is what's harder here, because the sort of theory has been perpetually that if you go outside policing to investigate policing, the people who are doing it won't understand policing, and so they will miss part of the point. And there was a whole time, I recall well, when I was Victims Commissioner and before, when we tried to recruit into that appellate process, the Independent Office of Police Complaints, people from elsewhere who had done this kind of scrutiny, so people from HMRC, for instance, to try to bring that fresh view and to get outside the policing establishment. That's extremely difficult, because there is an argument that unless you know how the police work, as people like I do, for instance, who've been defence lawyers in the past, then you will miss the points in some of the complaints and actually not do well for the complainants. So that is a great institutional problem. What is good here, though, I think, I'm not saying this is perfect, but really, what more can the police do? They are going to look. What more can the mayor do? They are going to look at complaints. So there will be, as it were, not a third tier to answer the complaint, but a scrutiny over how they're being answered at all, so that a fresh look will in fact come from this range of people, none of them who have anything to do with policing, who are going to look into it from start to finish. So this panel will look at whether arrests are lawful, if anyone should ever be strip searched and why, and the questioning and the complaints and the way that domestic abuse is dealt with, which played a big role. They were doing that very badly in my report. So I have to invest, and I do, faith in this panel of experts from outside policing who will nonetheless throw a definite searchlight on it. Mm-hmm. Greater Manchester mayoralty is really quite ashamed of how the police behaved before, and they are determined to make it good. So we must give them a chance. I look forward to meeting this panel in December.
Dame Vera, we mentioned that 2 of the 28 recommendations hadn't been implemented. One of them, female-only cells, one of the reasons given for that, why it wasn't implemented, was overcrowding in prisons and then police cells being used for some of that. Is that a legitimate pushback to that recommendation? And in general, how fearful are you of the secondary effects of overcrowding in prisons?
Well, it's overcrowding in police custody, because what happens is when the prisons are full, of course, they look to somewhere else to put them, and the only other cells available will be in police. That's the reason why people have had to be let out of prison, so that you don't have to stop arresting people, whatever they've done, because you haven't got a police cell to put them in. I think the overcrowding point is probably a valid one. What they have done is allocate a number of women's cells, and that's what I wanted. The real point of that was actually to make sure that that things which were going very, very badly wrong before this inquiry, such as the provision of sanitary protection for women, wasn't being made available. They had to press the buzzer when they were in the cell and needed this stuff, and then in long gaps before people came, and invariably a man. So now they have allocated cells, and when they're to be used for women, because a woman has been arrested, that should be coordinated. There will be that provision in cells, and it should be then attended only by a woman officer. The problem has been that sometimes they've had to say, well, we haven't got any women in custody, so we'll have to use these for men. That's the problem so far, but the policy intent remains steadfast, and that's something else that I must say is pretty impressive. Kate Green, the deputy mayor, has recruited exactly what I recommended, which is a super custody inspector who is not a police officer, who is appointed by the mayoralty, is going to go round to custody suites at random without notice, enter and look at anything that person wants to do to see how it's going. I have no doubt whatsoever it's a woman that these aspects of women's treatment will be right at the top of the hit list.
Dame Vera, one final very quick question for you. Should this be a blueprint for the rest of the police across the country? It's naive to think these problems that only exist in Manchester.
Definitely, it should be a blueprint. I am tomorrow going to the Home Office, to the relevant strategy board, to discuss exactly that, how these recommendations now taken on can be spread. In addition, there are some things which Greater Manchester now say they won't do, which I said were unlawful. If unlawful practices can be cancelled in one force, then it makes it all the clearer that they're unlawful in others. So it's going to be in the police interest to follow Greater Manchester Police, and tomorrow I'll be pressing for exactly that to do.
Dame Vera, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And our thanks, of course, to Jason as well. Switching focus now, as the UK gets set for a so-called Arctic blast, bringing days of snow and ice, a warning about the dangers of driving in such conditions, with black ice a real hazard for many behind the wheel. Let's bring in to discuss this the AA Patrol of the Year, Chris Wood. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. How bad is it expected to get in the next couple of days?
I mean, we've already seen frost on the ground. The critters are out. Obviously, we're expecting it to get extremely, a lot colder. We expect it to get a lot worse than what it already has been.
What's the sort of tip for motorists and drivers?
So the main thing is preparation. Plan your route. Make sure you know where you're going. Is your journey essential? Plan for any diversions, any delays that could be possible. And just being able to take your time, set off early, make sure all your windows are clear, defrosted. If we do see any snow, make sure all your lights, all your windows are clear from snow, and especially on your roof as well. You don't, when you're coming up to braking at a junction, the last thing you want when you're braking is snow to come across your windscreen and block your vision. And then, along with that, it's just a case of just taking it nice and steady. Obviously, normal driving conditions at 30 miles an hour, it takes about 23 metres to come to a stop. It could be up to 10 times that in snow and ice. So giving yourself plenty of space in between you and the vehicle in front. Coming up to junctions, again, take it real nice and steady. Use your gears to slow you down if you're in a manual. Really, really gentle on your brakes. And again, with accelerating, really gentle accelerator. Try not to have any wheel spin. Set off in second if you can do, if you're in a manual. If you're in a more automatic, they have certain modes where snow and ice modes that you can set on the vehicle, for this reason. So again, it's just give yourself plenty of time and plenty of space between the other road users.
As a nation, are we good at listening to that sort of advice, or do you tend to see accidents pick up when the weather worsens?
I mean, there is always going to be people rushing. If you are seeing delays, it is just human to panic and rush a little bit. But that's why we're advising set off earlier. If your journey is essential, do you really have to do it? Can you work from home on these days where it is going to be bad weather? And take the main routes where it is going to be gritted, and the most road users are going to be. So it's going to be better on the roads.
Chris, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So to come here on the breakfast show, picturesque or more spitting image? What's your verdict on the statue built in honour of footballer Harry Kane?
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Let's focus back in on the war in Ukraine. And President Biden has lifted restrictions on Ukraine using American long-range missiles to strike targets in Russia. There hasn't yet been any announcement on whether Britain will do the same. A few minutes ago, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told this programme that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will keep under review what the Ukrainian government ask for from us. Well, the UK has supplied Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine so far, which can hit targets up to 250 kilometres away. A key advantage is that they can be fired from an aircraft, which means Ukrainian pilots can be further away from the front line. They fly low to avoid detection and are considered some of the best types of missiles for hitting dug-in enemy targets like bunkers or ammunition stores. But they're also expensive, with each missile costing more than £760,000. Joining me now, Defence and Security Analyst Simon Diggins. Simon, great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us. First and foremost, how significant is it that President Biden has given the US approval?
No, very significant. This has been a long-term ask of the Ukrainian government for a while. They've been asking permission from the US to use these tactical missiles. They've also been asking for us, the British and the French, to be able to use Storm Shadow and Scalp over longer ranges, and with the assistance of the Americans of guidance technology. They've been used up to now, the Storm Shadow and Scalp, but not with the US guidance technology. So this hopefully will come along and follow on from there as well. And of course, the Ukrainians have also been asking the Germans for permission to use the Tarsus missile, which is their long-range missile as well. Up until now, again, the Germans have refused. So this is a major change.
Well, assuming that all the necessary permissions are granted, if they haven't been already, what sort of difference will this make in the war? Will this mean that Ukraine has by far the best missiles, or in fact, does Russia have pretty good missiles and missile defences as well?
No, I mean, both true. The Russians have got good missiles and good missile defence as well. But the sense has been that there have been good targets, legitimate targets, that Ukraine has not been able to hit. At the moment, because of the permissions, were only allowed to be fired, missiles only allowed to be fired essentially within Ukrainian territory, which they included the Crimea. Concentrations of Russian forces prior to offensives, etc., were effectively untouchable, or very difficult to get at, except with the Ukrainians' own developed missiles or drones. And so what they were looking to do is be able to use these missiles against those targets. We know, for example, at the moment, that the Russians are building up their forces around the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. And they clearly have plans to try and capture that small salient that's taken place. This will give the Ukrainians the opportunity to engage those targets before they actually approach them. I think the wider issue, though, is actually this is all slightly part of what may be an end game. It's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, perhaps, but some kind of conversation. It's a military conversation at this stage, sort of fighting about what's going to happen when President Trump turns up. Because one of the things that Zelensky put forward when he went to US about 2 months ago, he talked about what he needed in order to defend Ukraine in the long term. And he talked about a non-nuclear but strategic deterrent. And he's looking basically at a range of missiles to be able to hit targets in Russia prior to the Russians engaging them. So there's an element of this dealing with the current issues, the Kursk incursion, dealing also with the North Koreans who have arrived on the scene. And again, there's a messaging from the US. This is all about deterring Pyongyang from deploying more troops. That's the message that's coming from Biden. But my personal view is this is actually part of a preparation for what may well happen when President Trump comes to power in the early new year.
We just had to crossing the wires some numbers on those attacks yesterday, the opposite direction in Sumy, as Russian strikes hit yesterday. 10 people, including 2 children, now confirmed to have died in those strikes. Simon, I guess that sort of highlights the temperature, if you will, and the need for these things. Do you think that these Russian attacks over the weekend came in advance of knowing or thinking that this sort of permission was going to be granted? Either way, I guess my question is, the very fact that permission is being granted, do you think that will lead to greater response from Russia in the short term?
It will. There'll be a response by Russia. I mean, the attacks over the weekend were very much focused on Ukrainian infrastructure. Clearly, many civilians were killed and many more were injured. But it was the largest missile attack since 2022. So this was a major attack on their infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure. Whether or not the Russians, through intelligence, had worked out this is what's going to happen is unclear, and clearly we may never know that. But I think Putin is very much aware that there's thinking going on about what may happen in the future, and there will be a response. There'll also be a response to us. So if Keir Starmer, I hope he does, but if Keir Starmer also gives permission for the Storm Shadow missiles now to be used with the assistance of the US guidance, then there will be a response from Russia, and we should expect that.
Simon, as always, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us. We'll be speaking to James Cartlidge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, at 8:15. Let's have a quick look at the weather. As we've been saying, it's been cold, a cold Arctic air, no less, sweeping south across the country, and it will reach all parts by the middle of the week. A low pressure system from the Atlantic likely to give snow for northern England this evening and overnight, and it will be cold today over northern and eastern parts, and temperatures in rural spots widely sub-zero. That's your weather. Now, England coasted to a 5-0 victory against Ireland at Wembley in what was Lee Carsley's last game in temporary charge of the side. And it was England's captain and talisman, Harry Kane, who gave them the lead, making no mistake from the spot. It was his 69th goal for the Three Lions and sees him continue to extend his lead at the top of England's record goal-scoring list.
Yeah, that's right. After languishing in storage in East London for 4 years, this statue of Kane will be unveiled later this morning at the home of North London-based Ridgeway Rovers, the team he played for as a kid.
Which I love that this is... I remember talking about this a while back, about how it wasn't the best possible statue of him, and that's why it's been in storage, right?
Well, it was partly due to COVID. That sort of derailed things a little bit. There wasn't a decision on the home, where it would be. Nobody really wanted to take up responsibility, perhaps, of this great statue. But finally, there is a home, and it will be unveiled.
Do you know what?
Later.
It's actually not that bad. I mean, it's fantastic that it's found a home. Fantastic that it's Ridgeway Rovers, where he started his career. He's going to be there today?
He will be there later today.
Fantastic for that local club. I mean, all round, that's very positive. Actually, it's not that bad. We've had some worse statues in the past.
Exactly.
Haven't we just?
Exactly.
So which ones have we got? I think we've got this Ronaldo one, which is
I think
really...
this is my favourite. It's Madeira Airport, wasn't it, that it was unveiled? And then on social media, it went a little bit wild.
I mean, what I love about this is a man that really cares about his image as well.
For sure.
And it's not very flattering.
Oh, jeez.
And we've got one of the Queen as well. This was the one which was meant to... Yeah, this is terrible. For the late Queen as well. I mean, just doesn't... What's odd about it, the Phillips quite good. It's almost... So if the same person has done them... Sorry if that's the gentleman that did it.
Might be him.
But the Phillip one is pretty good. We're out of time. We'll be back with all the day's top stories after this short break.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Good morning. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, President Biden allows Ukraine to strike targets inside Russia with American-made long-range missiles. Will Britain do the same? We'll ask the government. We'll get reaction from the shadow Defence Secretary.
Plus, Greater Manchester Police changed their rules for strip-searching women after a Sky News investigation.
And as cold weather hits the country, we'll focus on the impact of cuts to the winter fuel payments.
It is Monday, the 18th of November. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says support for Ukraine is his #1 priority as he arrives in Rio for the G20 summit. Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham hails new rules on strip searches as a landmark moment to improve the safety of women, but some victims say they're still scared of the police. A royal break-in as masked thieves steal farm vehicles from the Windsor Castle estate. Plus leaks, mould and faulty lifts, life inside a London tower block where residents say they've been abandoned.
We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
And Wembley winners, England to beat the Republic of Ireland 5-0 to win promotion in the Nations League. A very good morning to you. The US government says it will allow Ukraine to use American long-range missiles to carry out limited strikes against targets inside Russia. It's expected that the UK will do the same, but there hasn't been any official response from Keir Starmer, who's, of course, in Rio for the G20 summit. Well, in the last hour, government told this programme that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will keep under review the support that is offered to Ukraine. Let's speak to our Chief Correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who's in Kyiv for us now. Stuart, has this decision been celebrated in Kyiv?
I think it's certainly going to be celebrated widely. Whether it's a massive game changer, defence experts say that it isn't necessarily, but I would say that for the Ukrainian military it is a major development because they now have that permission that they've been asking for absolutely months to be able to fire long-range weapons at Russian targets inside Russia itself. They've had these weapons for a while, which does raise a few questions because they have been using them and there's a limited supply. So we don't know actually how many they have left. But I suspect, well, the feeling here is that they're going, whatever they've got is going to be used quite soon. Now, reports from the United States says that it'll be in the Kursk region. This is an area of Russia that Ukraine invaded in the summer, particularly targeting North Korean troops as well. And this is why permission ultimately has been given by President Biden, is because of the North Koreans sending their soldiers to assist Russia. That seems to be the thing that pushed him across the edge, because his own administration has been at odds within itself over whether they should give permission for these weapons to be used because of the fear of an escalation with Russia. Of course, President Putin has said he will consider this a major escalation, and there's lots of discussion about whether that means attacking other NATO nations. He'd say it effectively would be NATO attacking Russia. But we haven't seen that yet, and as far as we're aware, these weapons haven't been deployed yet, but there is this expectation that it will be quite soon, not least because our own military contacts are telling me that there's already fierce fighting taking place in Kursk as a precursor, perhaps, to Russia launching as many as 50,000 soldiers to try and take it back. So I suspect we will see those weapons being used quite soon.
Stuart, in terms of the sort of timing of all of this, do you think that there's upset that it didn't come sooner, or is there sort of celebration that President Biden is doing what he can before President Trump takes over?
There's definitely been frustration here with the Biden administration about what he has allowed them to do and the amount of support they've been getting generally from the West. There is a sense in Ukraine, and this has been said to me so many times, that the West, and particularly the United States, are happy for Ukraine to defend themselves against Russia, but had never gave them enough support, enough money, enough weapons to actually finish the job, and that they found themselves in a sort of limbo where the battle lines are sort of frozen, but still huge numbers of men are dying. Now, they may see this, the Ukrainians, as that step up, that they can actually take the fight more effectively to Russia. It has gone down well. It's an interesting move by President Biden, because obviously Donald Trump is going to be taking over the presidency, and he might take a considerably different view to the current administration about how much support they give to Ukraine. They've indicated in the past it will actually be less, though I'd have to say there's quite a lot of people here as thinking, well, maybe Trump will actually take it to Putin and say, you've actually got to stop, and we need to have some type of negotiated settlement, and if he won't agree, then he'll support Ukraine Ukraine further than he has indicated so far. So a lot to play for, but it is a significant development. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Stuart, as always, thanks so much, Stuart Ramsey, for us there in Kyiv. Mari, of course, focus on how quickly, if at all, that the UK follows suit, and all eyes on the PM in Rio today.
Yes, absolutely. So Keir Starmer's in Rio for the G20 summit, meeting global leaders, having several meetings about a range of issues, but realistically, Ukraine is going to be top of, if not one of the top kind of items on the agenda. And Bridget Phillipson, earlier in the programme, speaking to yourself. Now, she wouldn't say categorically whether or not the British government is going to give the green light to be able to for Ukraine to be able to use British-supplied missiles against Russia on Russian soil. But that is the feeling we are getting in terms of the fact that we know that the French have been wanting this for a while. Now that the Americans have done it, it feels likely that we will follow suit. But she wasn't giving us much detail. But we can have a listen to some of the tone in which she was talking and the way she was talking about a steadfast support for Ukraine.
You'll appreciate that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will always keep under review what the Ukrainian people and their military require. And going into the G20, the Prime Minister has set out very clearly that the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have our full backing. That's always been on a cross-party basis in Parliament, and that's the approach we've taken from government to continue that approach.
So Bridget Phillipson there trying to kind of hold the line realistically. But we know overnight we heard from the government, they said that they wanted to make sure that G20 leaders were reminded of the unfathomable consequences of Putin succeeding were he to succeed, and therefore why it's so important to continue to support Ukraine. And then as just a quick side note, there is also a really major meeting going on today, meeting between Keir Starmer and President Xi Jinping of China. Controversial, and it's the first time that's happened where a UK PM has met with a Chinese leader in about 6 years. So that will be an interesting one to watch in terms of balancing those discussions around trade, but also around security, but also the areas in which we disagree with China, notably the persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in China.
Mari, as always, thanks so much. Now, strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, except as a last resort following an independent review into the force's treatment of women and girls in police custody. The Dame Vera Baird inquiry was commissioned after a Sky News investigation revealed a series of harrowing stories of women being mistreated by officers. 26 of the 28 recommendations made to Greater Manchester have been implemented. That includes an end to so-called welfare strip searches, plus the establishment of an independent scrutiny panel to look at arrests and custody records, and appointing a new super-independent custody visitor to make unannounced visits. Well, let's bring in our home editor, Jason Farrow, who's been at the lead of this story throughout. Jason, what's the headline for you from today?
Well, I think it's great that they've ended welfare strip searches. That was something that was a real bone of contention. A lot of women felt that they were being used to kind of exact power over them, and the scrutiny panel could be significant. I think the one thing that I'm concerned about is the complaint system, and I just want to take you through the story of Sophie, who was one of the complainants in the Baird review. She was arrested at 3 a.m. in the morning by a lot of police officers, taken to a cell, kept there for 11 hours over complaints made by her abusive partner, who was a known violent offender, that she had broken his wing mirror and that she had bruised his arm while he had strangled her. She was being arrested, she was told, to protect a vulnerable person. We spoke to Sophie and she recounts what happened.
He's got a history of domestic violence. He's got a history of being incarcerated. They knew what I'd gone through. They knew what I was trying to protect myself from. I was in regular contact with domestic violence support workers who were meeting with police liaison. They knew that I'd had the locks changed. They knew I had an alert on the house and my phone.
So Sophie believes that the police were being used by her partner as a form of his coercion. Dame Vera agreed. She said that the arrest was unlawful, totally unnecessary. And Steve Watson, the Chief Constable, had this to say.
The police are being used by a domestic abuser to abuse
that woman. That's what happened, isn't it? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm appalled by it. I'm appalled by it. I am a professional police officer, and I am surrounded by thousands of good police officers who will simply and similarly be appalled.
There were a lot of people involved in that arrest, and they all got it wrong.
Indeed. It's a systemic failure, a leadership failure, a process failure. I do think in individual circumstances there may be a failure of experience.
And yet, a month after Stephen Watson said that, his own complaint system found that the arrest was justified. It said there was sufficient grounds for the arrest, and it told Sophie that the service she'd received was acceptable. Now, they have since apologised. The police have since apologised to her. They say that was incorrect, and I can read their statement to us. They said complaints relating to the Baird review, including Sophie's, are subject to a fair and thorough examination without fear or favour by our Professional Standards Directorate. Where an investigation finds there to be a cause to answer, we will ensure officers, a case to answer rather, will ensure officers face disciplinary proceedings. We are working hard to ensure that the people of Greater Manchester, particularly women and girls, can have confidence in their police force. And I think it was interesting talking to Dame Vera. She feels that this scrutiny panel that's being introduced will help oversee the complaint system.
Yeah, I thought the conversation with her was really interesting, and we'll be talking to Andy Burnham as well next hour, and you'll be back for that. Jason, thanks so much. Time for all of the day's other top stories now. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Detectives investigating the murder of a woman whose body was found in a car boot have launched an international manhunt to find her husband. Arshita Brella was found dead in Ilford in East London in the early hours of Thursday after someone in her hometown of Corby phoned officers with concerns about her welfare. Well, this is the man wanted over her death, Pankaj Lamba. It's suspected he's fled the country, and police are urging anyone with information to come forward. Vulnerable young people are being placed in illegal and unsafe accommodations such as caravans and Airbnbs, according to a new report into the social care system. Parliament will today consider new measures to stop companies running children's homes from making excessive profits. And it could finally be time to get your woolly jumper out, as an Arctic blast is set to hit parts of the UK this week. A snow and ice warning is in place for northern Scotland this morning, and the Met Office has issued another warning for parts of northern England and southern Scotland from tonight. Australian senators have voted to censor Aboriginal colleague Lydia Thorpe after her protest in front of the King last month. Now, Thorpe shouted, "You're not my king." This was during a reception in Canberra for the King. The censor described Thorpe's actions as disrespectful and disruptive. This was her reaction.
Censure motion is like that to me. I don't give a damn about censure motion. In fact, I'm going to use it for kindling, and I'm proud that I stood up against the King coloniser.
And masked burglars have reportedly stolen a quad bike and a pickup truck from the Windsor Castle estate. The Sun newspaper is reporting that the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children were sleeping nearby at the time. Let's get more details on this story. Saba's here this morning. Great to have you with us. So what details are we hearing so far? What do we know?
Good morning. So, as you mentioned, this was a story reported in the Sun newspaper this morning, and it's essentially that two men scaled a 6-foot fence. This was on the evening of October the 13th. They broke through a security gate using a stolen truck. Now, as we understand, the King himself was not in residence at the time, but it is reported that the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children were sleeping nearby. There's the front page of the paper there. Now, in a statement to the Sun newspaper, Thames Valley Police have said that around 11:45 p.m. on Sunday, October the 13th, we received a report of burglary at a property on the Crown Estate land near to the A308 in Windsor. Offenders entered a farm building and made off with a black Isuzu pickup and a red quad bike. They then made off towards the Old Windsor and Datchet area. Now, as we understand it, no arrests have been made so far, but investigations by the police are ongoing.
Summer, thanks so much. Right, her mother, whose council flat in East London is full of damp and mould, says her home is making her children ill. Sky's Becky Johnson has this report for us.
This is Waltham Forest in East London, a place with one of the longest waiting lists for council housing in the country. Thousands are desperate for a flat in blocks like these. But we've been inside and found a snapshot of Britain's housing crisis.
You don't want to touch the damp?
It's cold and mouldy in this flat. The damage has been caused by a persistent leak. It's been like this for 8 years.
That is the girls' room. At the bottom is all mouldy. So the paint has come off. We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
For years, they've been begging the council to fix it. Life like this is all her daughters can remember.
They grow up watching this grow with them as well. Do you know how sad that is?
I can't breathe that much.
Since a baby?
Yeah, since a baby.
They want us to live in hell, that's what it is. They want us to live in misery.
That's how Ahmed felt too when water poured in through his ceiling on and off for a year.
Just coming out of these areas here, just completely seeping out, and it would come directly down to the switches. So switching it on was just a complete hazard.
An NHS worker, Andrea, who's disabled, sometimes struggles to get to her flat on the 11th floor.
The lifts is the biggest nightmare. I've had to spend a couple of nights not here because I couldn't get in there.
How often do they break down?
Too often.
Earlier this year, flammable cladding was removed from the buildings, but it hasn't yet been replaced, so they've been left with no insulation.
It's freezing, you know. So throughout Christmas, we're just, you know, literally left to freeze. The scariest winter we're going to have to go through living in these buildings.
Balcony walls have had to be removed too. Some, like Steve on the 5th floor, have been left with just a flimsy barrier. Are you worried about your children when they're out on the balcony?
Well, definitely, I can't let them come out here. This is a no-go.
Waltham Forest Council insists the work is being carried out safely. They are, however, unable to say when the buildings will be re-insulated. They say they respond to concerns in a timely manner and they apologise to Faz, saying they'll arrange an urgent inspection of her flat.
I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my 2 girls. Then I feel like maybe they will take this serious.
The government has made social house building a key priority, but the experience of people here raises questions about whether existing homes are fit for purpose. Becky Johnson, Sky News, East London.
Well, time now to get the Conservative response to all of the stories of the day, and one in particular, of course, is top of mind. Well, joining us is the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartlidge. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you make of this decision by President Biden to give approval to Ukraine to use their weapons long range into Russia?
I welcome it very strongly. I think it's important, and I hope it is a precursor to the UK granting full autonomy on use of Storm Shadow. And the reason is actually quite straightforward. The fact that there are thousands of North Korean troops supporting Russia is a significant escalation. It's a worrying development, and I think given all the support we've given to Ukraine and the attacks we've seen in just the last 24 hours, the continued slaughter of innocent Ukrainians, we have to continue doing all that we can to support them.
I guess the question is, why now? Do you think this could be framed as weak from President Biden? If he felt this was warranted, to wait until after the election, or is there some other reason as to why now is legitimate in terms of timing?
Well, I think the key point, and I think it was referred to by the President's spokesman, Keir Starmer referred to this, and I welcome that, was this point about North Korea. I mean, we just have to turn this around and say, you know, how do you think the Russians would react if suddenly 10,000 NATO troops were supporting Ukraine? It's a massive escalation in that sense. And it's not just that, it's the nature of the continued bombardment. I met a delegation of Ukrainian MPs last week, and when they talk about the continued nature of these bombardments, glide bombs, drones, etc., it's not just frightening for them, that the toll it's starting to impact on their country is terrible, and continued attacks on critical infrastructure. I do think it's the right time.
So you don't think it should have come sooner?
Well, look, we were calling for it from the summer, just to be clear. Obviously, these are complex matters. I think on this we had to move with the Americans, so I welcome the fact that the President has given this steer, and as I say, I hope it now leads to the UK doing the same.
Can you understand, I know the American political system is different from ours here, the transition of the power is is brutally fast, with moving trucks always in Downing Street imminently. Could you understand the dissatisfaction from Trump supporters to see this happen between election and Inauguration Day?
Well, Biden is still the president. That's how their constitution works. He has to respond to events as they are changing. And I hope that all those on all sides in the US would look at the fact you've got thousands of North Korean troops, and there may be many more to come. That's a pretty significant strategic moment. I think all of us recognise the wider threat here from potential adversaries, and so I think it's the right step to take. And I think from a UK point of view, we've now got to focus on what we can do, and that's about Storm Shadow, but it's also about what more we can do to support Ukraine. We'll have the 1,000th day since the invasion tomorrow, and I look forward to the UK government continuing to take a lead with our strong support.
What is your view on what the UK-China relationship should be in the coming years?
Well, I think it's certainly important that we have constructive dialogue with them. I believe the Prime Minister will meet them at the G20. The caveat really is we were very much, this is eyes wide open, recognise the huge threat they potentially pose. When I was at the Ministry of Defence, we were very clear about trying to reduce, for example, the amount of Chinese content we had in our supply chains. And I think that's the sort of thing the government should be doing. And I think that it's one thing for the Prime Minister to promise that this meeting is about UK growth and security, but that's quite a challenge to pull both of those off. And he must be clear to the Chinese about the human rights abuses we've seen in Hong Kong and elsewhere.
But in terms of actually meeting him, which of course hasn't happened since I think Theresa May, Prime Minister to President, that's a legitimate thing to be doing?
I accept that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't ignore China. They are a major nation. They are a huge economic power. But I think, as I said, the key phrase Prime Minister Sunak used to use was eyes wide open, being very aware of the potential threat, being very clear to them about our concerns on human rights and so on. And of course, we expect Prime Minister Keir Starmer to be making those points when he has that meeting to express our concern about those issues, particularly, for example, in Hong Kong.
If in the years to come the US puts pressure on us to take tougher positions on China than perhaps we otherwise would have done, what should we do?
Well, the US is a very close ally of ours and will be, whoever is the president. I very much welcome President Trump following his election and look forward to working closely with his administration. I think that the point is, because we have a close relationship with them, these are things we need to engage in, as a strong ally. We'll see what happens in the future. My immediate focus is obviously Shadow Defence Secretary on what's been announced. I think it's a good development. It's an absolute priority for this country that we stand strong with Ukraine, given the way that Russia has behaved, its aggression, the unprovoked invasion, and I think that it's more important than ever that we stand strongly with the US and strongly in support of Ukraine.
And just finally, Shadow Defence Secretary, if the UK permissions as relates to Storm Shadows is forthcoming, as is expected in the days ahead, and then indeed those weapons are used on Russian territory, does it put Brits here on British soil in danger for Russian retaliation?
I think what puts us, if you like, Brits here in danger would have been if we hadn't helped Ukraine to stand up to Russia. We have not deployed directly into the Ukrainian theatre. North Korean troops have, in contrast. That is a massive escalation. What we've done is recognise here is a sovereign democratic nation invaded without any provocation by a dictatorship, subjected to terrible bombing, loss of civilian life and military personnel, huge casualties on the Russian side, which Putin seems oblivious to. In a situation like that, we have to stand up to that bully. Otherwise, ultimately, yes, we will be in the firing line.
And just finally, whilst you're here, can I ask how you're planning to vote on the assisted dying bill?
In favour.
And that's because of a long-standing belief of wanting to get to this place? Or?
Well, so in 2015, I voted against, actually. And I voted against because although in principle I do see the argument of having this right in extreme circumstances, it should be said, very narrow circumstances, I felt that the bill was not strong enough in terms of safeguards. What I've wanted was to be able to enable people to have this choice, but in very limited circumstances, but with strong safeguards to avoid abuse. And I think, and I hope this is the case, we have that in terms of the bill that's coming before us.
Thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you, James Cartlidge. We're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll be talking about all of the day's political news with Jack Blanchard and Sam Coates. We'll be right back.
migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot, by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
Sí.
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes. This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear-gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll be talking to Jack and Sam. They'll be here to look ahead to the week ahead in Westminster. But first, reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thanks so much, Wilfred. US President Joe Biden has lifted restrictions on Ukraine, prohibiting the use of American long-range missiles to strike deeper inside Russia. On this programme, the Defence Secretary, James Cartlidge, urged the UK to do the same. There hasn't been an official statement from Downing Street just yet. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says that support for Ukraine is the #1 priority at the G20 summit in Rio. He'll also meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Brazil later today, and it will be the first meeting between a British Prime Minister and Chinese leader in more than half a decade. And strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, except as a last resort. It's following an independent review into the force's treatment of women and girls in police custody, all triggered, of course, by a Sky News investigation. Masked burglars have reportedly stolen a quad bike and a pickup truck from the Windsor Castle estate by scaling a 6-foot fence. Now, the theft happened last month while the Prince and the Princess of Wales and their children were sleeping nearby.
Leah, thanks so much. Now, slow progress has been made in the first week of negotiations at the COP29 climate summit, with nations deadlocked on the issue of climate finance. Let's get out now to Baku, and our climate change reporter Victoria Seabrook joins us. I have to say, Victoria, I didn't even know it was still going on. What's on the agenda still this week?
Yeah, so these negotiations are always 2 weeks long, which sounds like a long time, but bearing in mind they're talking about everything from future aid budgets to how you get an economy off fossil fuels and everything else in between. This time last week, as they were starting, we were talking about dark clouds hanging over the summit. I think it's safe to say that now it looks like we're on the edge of a storm. Last week we were talking about the long shadow of the re-election of Donald Trump hanging over these talks. He questions the science of climate change. We also saw Argentina's team walk away from the talks as their president Milei sought to align himself with Trump and recalled the team after just 3 days. Over the weekend as well, Trump appointed or selected his pick for Energy Secretary, a veteran of the fossil fuel industry's champion of fracking. This week it's looking even harder. Negotiations are at a stalemate over this fund. As you mentioned, they're trying to agree how to finance climate measures in developing nations, and there's a sense here really that they're desperately hoping for some signals coming out of the G20 Leaders Summit in Rio. Those hopes may well be dashed. They're hoping for a bit of a steer on transitioning away from fossil fuels. That was the headline pledge that came out of last year's COP. And they also want a signal on money, how much money is actually going to be on the table for this goal. Leaders there are very much preoccupied with what's going on in Ukraine. It's now going to be incumbent on Azerbaijan, host nation, to try to forge a way forward through very divided, almost 200 countries here. And there have been some questions about whether it can handle it or whether it's a little bit out of its depth. So certainly a difficult week ahead here.
Victoria, thanks so much for that from Baku in a camera spot that you know only too well, Sam.
Oh, it's just a week since I was standing at that very spot at a climate change summit between two oil fields.
There we go. Classic timing. And obviously Jack and Sam here to talk about the week ahead in politics. But it's interesting snapshot to use, Sam, because it sort of teases out the first topic, which you've spoken about. And the question was too many air miles, too many trips abroad. The Prime Minister's obviously on one at the moment, but this one is unequivocally widely supported and understood why he's there, with potentially a big announcement to come today.
Yes. I don't think I'm saying too many. I'm just saying it's a lot, and it's interesting how they choose to explain the fact that he's out of the country quite a lot. He'll be out of the country until towards the end of Wednesday. But yeah, nobody would criticise the Prime Minister for not being at the G20. That is one of the big global summits of the year. And today is a very big day in global diplomacy. There are two things on the agenda. The first is what's going on with Ukraine. Overnight, of course, those reports have been reflecting all morning that it looks like the US have authorised their own missiles to be deployed into Russia, the longer-range missiles. The question is, does that mean that the UK Storm Shadow missiles can also be used? Probably, but we just haven't had that confirmation yet. And then the other big thing today is that Keir Starmer will see President Xi. This is the first meeting since Theresa May had a meeting like this back in 2018. Britain looking right now like it's tiptoeing closer to China, even before it's completed its internal report on what relations should look like with China, just to the point where you know that the Americans are going to get more and more cross with any ally that cozies up to Beijing.
It's interesting, Jack, because you just had the Tories on, James Cartlidge sort of saying, yeah, of course we should meet President Xi. You know, it depends what comes out of the meeting. It's almost striking to think that this is the first meeting between a UK Prime Minister and the Chinese President for 5 or 6 years. Did we come close to them under the various leaders since Theresa May, or has it been quite a sort of moment in time that we're having the first one again?
There's various reasons for it. Rishi Sunak tried to meet with President Xi and the meeting got cancelled at the last minute at one of these summits. During the coronavirus pandemic, President Xi very much was not leaving the country, and so there was not much chance to meet him during that period. But it also reflects a very strong sort of strand of China scepticism within the Tory party. There was a lot of pressure on successive Tory prime ministers, particularly towards the latter years of them being in power, from the backbenches to be pretty hawkish on China, to not really want to have too much to do with China. That pressure doesn't really exist for Keir Starmer. Labour MPs are more ambivalent than certainly one wing of the Tory party. And of course, Keir Starmer also has a huge parliamentary majority, so there's a limit to how much he has to care about what Labour MPs say anyway, because he's obviously going to win all the votes in the House of Commons during this Parliament. So it's a little bit different. And I think Keir Starmer, because of those two factors, sees this incoming government as a chance to sort of semi-reset relations with China a little bit, and that's probably what he'll be looking to do today.
Interestingly, though, the pressure, Sam, might well, as you've already alluded to, come from the US. There is a lot of unanswered questions about what the Trump administration's position will be on some international topics like Ukraine, but almost all of his foreign policy appointments have been major China hawks.
That's right. But also, it's not just the presidency, right? It's Congress, right? It's both houses of Congress. It's both parties, Democrats and Republicans, that, you know, the US is just much more China sceptic. And I think Britain's in a bit of a sort of push-me-pull-you situation, because you've got the US on that side, but increasingly as you look at this government, the Keir Starmer government's targets on green energy, on net zero, and the like, that probably does rely on Chinese technology, on green wind turbines, batteries coming in part or in full from China in order to be affordable. Bluntly, if you make it in Europe, it's going to be more expensive. If you make it in China, it's going to be cheaper. Cost is going to be a big factor in the net zero transition. You get the sense that Rachel Reeves is driving this conversation about being a little bit more, you know, collaborative with China. She's likely to go. I'm told the Prime Minister will go probably next year to Beijing. Again, that will be a landmark moment given the direction of global politics. So caught in the middle, wanting more trade with China, just at the point where I sense America is getting more and more sceptic on the subject.
That's right. The other big one as well is Chinese electric vehicles, because Britain is looking to really replace its fleet of petrol cars with electric vehicles, as we know, over the next 10 to 15 years. If they're going to do that, a lot of them are probably going to have to be made in China. And there's an ongoing debate about should there be big tariffs on electric vehicles coming in from China, or should we just open the floodgates and let us have lots and lots of these much cheaper EVs, because, of course, the price of electric vehicles is what puts most people off. But then you have a country essentially reliant upon Chinese technology, Chinese manufacturing for a long time to come.
The only thing I'd had on this is this was going to be a problem even if the US election result hadn't gone this way. Sources very high up in the US Treasury were saying that this was a problem. If you had to arbitrarily hit these net zero targets by 2030, the only way to do it is by fully embracing China. And just a quick reminder, as we all kind of see this meeting of Biden and Xi over the weekend and await the China hawk in Trump coming to power, the Biden administration just slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. I mean, I think that the US administration, whatever the colour it is, has been very hawkish on China now for 8 years consistently. And I think it would have created a problem. But as you said, if we're focused on these targets, then it's going to have to come with significant imports from China, which maybe we'll embrace. We'll see. Switch focus for us, Sam. The other big talking point that just keeps coming up, and I'm sure it will until we get to the vote, is assisted dying. Do we have any estimates, any ideas on which way that's heading?
Well, the vote is on November the 29th, so that's a week on Friday, and the sort of mood music is darkening a bit around it, because what it's generating is a lot of red on red. It's a bit like the Brexit debate. I mean, Bridget Phillipson earlier today telling you that she'd vote against. You've got Angela Rayner signalling that she'll vote against. Wes Streeting threw a hand grenade in last week. I understand that people in Downing Street are increasingly split on this, not on the issue of should we have assisted dying or not, but people, I'm told, like Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, worried about the politics of where this is going, because if it does get through on this, what's known as second reading debate, a vote on the principles of the debate, then a lot of next year is going to be sort of spent arguing about the detail of how it will work. Will it be done in the public sector? Will it be done in the private sector? How much will it cost? What will you have to stop doing in order to fund it? But also, you're not going to get Labour figures stopping arguing about it quite clearly. We're going to ask them, they're going to answer the questions. Wes Streeting isn't going to change his mind. Bridget Phillipson isn't going to change her mind. You're just going to have red on red clash, and it's getting grumpy. It was grumpy enough last week when Wes Streeting's effective deputy was hitting back at him people are upset about this, and that is a distraction from the economy, from borders, from NHS reform. None of this does the bigger picture of the Labour government any good at all.
Jack, was it? I mean, if this does pass and next year plays out as Sam is sort of suggesting, will we look back on it and say, if this was ever potentially going to pass, it should have been initiated by the government, it should have been formal? Was it almost a little bit sort of short-sighted or weak to allow it to materialise in this secondary way?
Well, some people definitely think that. Some people would say that Keir Starmer is a person who actually passionately believes in assisted dying and has done for a very long time. He's won a massive mandate from the country. If he wants to do this, then bring forward a government bill and do it properly, so to speak. That was very much not the approach that Labour took during the general election, where they were very scared about making any controversial commitments at all, because the theory within political circles is that assisted dying is only ever really a vote loser. People are not going to vote for your party because you're putting it forward, but they might vote against it because they really feel strongly against it. And so Labour stayed away from it during the election campaign. And so Keir Starmer probably feels he can't really now bring it forward, having not made that commitment before the vote. And therefore it is being done in this slightly sideways way, with a backbench bill and government ministers being allowed to make up their own mind. And as Sam says, it is a distraction. This is a government that has watched what's happened to the US Democrats, destroyed by Donald Trump in America. And as the lesson they're taking from that is that we just need to talk endlessly about two things: how to grow the economy and make people richer, and how to make the borders more secure. The two things that the Democrats lost on, they don't want to be losing on that in 2029. And if we spend the whole of next year debating assisted dying and the detail of that, that's a whole load of time they're not talking about those two key issues.
And I'm having conversations with people at the very top of government going, we dropped the ball on this. They're quite explicitly, this has got out of control. It's on us. We shouldn't have let it happen in this way. It's not about the issue. It's about how it's being handled, and we've made a mistake.
Just very, very quickly to wrap things up, to Jack's point about borders and economy and talking as much about that. Are we going to get into a very interesting place next year, Sam, where they can talk about what they are or aren't doing all they like, but both of those two issues will have very firm numbers on? Whether the GDP numbers or the unemployment numbers on one side or the small boat crossings improve or worsen will be the narrative.
Yes, and they know that in Downing Street, and they're actually trying to get ahead of that. What they're doing in Downing Street is preparing to put some sort of targets on their different missions. They're trying to basically set up their own dashboard, have their own set of numbers against which they can measure their own goals. Let's see how that goes. Of course, people will focus on the number of small boat crossings and GDP figures and the path of both of those. It is unclear as yet why they will come down. It's where the rubber hits the road with all of Labour's policies, right? Whether it's promoting growth or whether it's stopping the boats. I think maybe the public can't quite see what are the things that achieve those two goals yet. Labour says they're doing a lot. Let's see next year if there's any sign of delivery. My sense it might take till the back half of the Parliament to actually see some improvement from where we are at the moment in both of those metrics, which might be why they're trying to get a different set of numbers against which they want the public to judge themselves, rather like Rishi Sunak did.
Well, either way, they've got plenty of time, haven't they? Plenty of votes in the short term. Jack, Sam, as always, a pleasure. Thanks so much. Now, England coasted to a 5-0 victory against Ireland at Wembley in what was Lee Carsley's last game in temporary charge of the side before Thomas Tuchel takes over in January. It was England's captain and talisman, Harry Kane, who gave his side the lead, making no mistake from the spot. That was his 69th goal for the Three Lions in 103 appearances from England's all-time top goal scorer, of course. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll be talking about the concerns over the winter fuel payments cut. We'll speak to the chief executive of the Fuel Bank Foundation.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. An international manhunt is underway as detectives investigating the murder of a woman whose body was found in a car boot continue to search for her husband, Pankaj Lamba. Harshita Brella was found dead in Ilford in East London on Thursday. Sky's Lisa Dowd has this report.
In the months prior to her murder, Harshita Brella had been the subject of a court order designed to protect victims of domestic violence. Now, police have released images of the man they believe killed her husband, Pankaj Lamba.
Our inquiries lead us to suspect that Harshita was murdered in Northamptonshire earlier this month by her husband, Pankaj Lamba. We suspect he transported Harshita's body from Northamptonshire to Ilford by car. We now believe he has fled the country.
Police won't say where they think Lamba has gone, but they are gathering evidence from crime scenes 100 miles apart to try to work out where and when she was killed. On Wednesday, police were called to her home in Corby in Northamptonshire after concerns were raised about her welfare. When they came to check on her here, officers say there was no answer. Close neighbours describe the home as a house of multiple occupancy with a number of people living here, but they say they didn't know Harshita. On Thursday, her body was found in the boot of a car in Ilford in East London. Police also cordoned off a second location in Corby, close to Harshita's home. A neighbour who didn't want to be identified said she'd seen her there.
I've heard a lot of shouting, a lot of banging around, a male or female arguing, raised voices, like furniture being thrown. She seems like a lovely young woman. She seems laid back and everything. It's just a shame to lose the lovely girl.
The Northamptonshire Force have referred themselves to the police watchdog, the IOPC, due to the previous contact they'd had with Harshita, as an international manhunt is launched to find her husband. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Northamptonshire.
Now, forecasters tell us we can expect snow, ice and freezing temperatures this week. And for some households, that could mean a choice between eating properly and heating their homes. Let's discuss this important topic with the Chief Executive, of the Fuel Bank Foundation, Matthew Cole. Matthew, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
You're actually this cold weather comes at an interesting time. You're in the midst of what you're saying is a race to end fuel poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're spending about a fortnight visiting a number of fuel banks up and down the UK to see the reality of what fuel poverty and fuel crisis is for families up and down the United Kingdom. Lots of people talk around the energy crisis slowly disappearing, but our sense is it's not. And actually, the last fortnight has been around trying to understand actually what is the reality for people who at the moment are struggling to keep their homes warm, and what do they think about the winter coming?
And what have you found? Can you put that into words for us, what the reality is?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people are managing really well, actually, but an awful lot of people are really struggling and are really fearful about winter. If you think about the cost of living crisis coming on the back of the pandemic, people's resilience has been eroded. If people are struggling on a very low income, the thought of winter bills of over £1,700 a year really starts to make people apprehensive. And we see that actually up and down the centres where we operate.
And Matthew, just give us a sense of what could help people. I was speaking to a pensioner at the weekend, a neighbour, who said in particular to the winter fuel payment cut that she's just a couple of pounds over that threshold, but it will have such a huge impact on her and her husband. And these are some of the stories that I imagine you'll be hearing up and down the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So the winter fuel payment was withdrawn at the last minute almost, so it removed the ability for people to plan for winter ahead. And so now if you're a pensioner on a low income, say maybe 11,500, you now won't receive the winter fuel payment, which makes a huge difference for people. Now the winter fuel payment wasn't particularly well targeted at all. It was just targeted at pensioners. And so there were some pensioners who really didn't need it to keep warm. But there were some pensioners, maybe like your neighbour, where it actually will make a difference. And that's what we're hearing in our centres, actually, that people are really apprehensive about what winter will bring.
Do you think making it targeted was a sensible decision, but perhaps the execution wasn't quite right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Targeting is really important, but the line was drawn in the wrong place. And I think when you talk to people on the street, you know, a line of around £11,500 is the limit for when you can receive winter fuel payment. It feels like that limit was too low. You know, we talk to lots of people, and actually this is a really big fear, especially for pensioners. But actually there's not any pensioners who are concerned about this winter. You know, we support people who prepay. They top up their meters. You know, this winter they'll be having to pay probably an extra £250 compared to the neighbour who pays by direct debit to keep warm. That's just over winter. They're using more energy, and so they need to top up their meters more frequently, and that causes concern too.
And tell us why you're in London at the moment and who you'll be visiting.
Yeah, so we're spending time actually around the UK talking to fuel bank partners, fuel bank centres. We have 800 centres across the UK where we're providing crisis help in the moment to people who are really struggling. We're also meeting those people who support us and also talking to the media about what we're actually seeing. And it comes a few days before Ofgem will announce on Friday the latest revision to the price cap, and I think we're not expecting good news there. You know, prices will stay reasonably high.
Matthew Cole from the Fuel Bank Foundation, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you. We've got a little bit of breaking news just crossing from Thames Valley Police relating to what we told you a bit earlier about the robbery of farm equipment from the Windsor Castle estate. They're saying at around 11:45 p.m. On Sunday, the 13th of October, we received a report of burglary at a property on Crown Estate land near to the A308 in Windsor. Offenders entered a farm building and made off with a black Isuzu pickup and a red quad bike. They then made off towards the Old Windsor Datchet area. No arrests have been made at this stage, and an investigation is ongoing. If anyone has information regarding this incident, we would ask them to call 101, quoting the reference number, which is rather long. I won't bore everyone with it here. Saba's with us. What is the incremental news in this? It's similar to what you were reporting earlier, but confirmation from the police.
Absolutely. So we have ourselves now confirmation from Thames Valley Police that this happened on the evening of October the 13th, so about a week or so ago. Now, this is a surprising story, given that you'd expect security at somewhere like Windsor Castle to be rather high, but this still took place, and so far no arrests have been made. Now, as mentioned, story from the Sun newspaper, 2 men scaled a 6-foot fence on the night of October 13th. They broke through a security gate using a stolen truck. Now, as we understand it, the King himself was not at Windsor Castle at the time, but it's believed that the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children were sleeping nearby. Now, just to reiterate from that statement you read earlier, police are saying that offenders entered a farm building and made off with a black Isuzu pickup and a red quad bike. They then made off towards the Old Windsor and Datchet area. Again, no arrests as it stands, but an investigation is currently ongoing.
Saba, thanks so much. Much appreciated. Let's have a look at the weather before we leave you this hour. Cold Arctic air sweeping south across the country will reach all parts midweek. However, a low pressure system from the Atlantic is likely to give some snow for northern England this evening and overnight. It's a cold start to the day over northern and eastern parts. Temperatures in rural spots are widely sub-zero with a frost for many. Cloud and rain over southern and western areas will keep it milder there. Early sunshine in the northeast will turn hazy as cloud increases from the southwest. Temperatures will range from just 3 Celsius in the north to a mild 13 Celsius in the southwest. Fresher winds in the south and west will spread eastward with the rain. As the wet weather runs into the colder air in the north, there'll be a spell of snow for the higher ground of Northern Ireland and the Pennines. This will extend to many central parts of the country overnight, while a few centimetres of snow may fall ground. Temperatures are currently too high to sustain snow cover for long. That's your weather. Well, we'll be back after the short break with all of the day's top stories. Some great guests next hour as well. So Peter Westmacott on the latest foreign policy developments, including Ukraine, and Andy Burnham as well.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, Ukraine gets the green light to strike targets inside Russia with American long-range missiles. We'll ask Britain's former ambassador to Washington if the UK could do the same.
Plus, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, joins us live after his police force changed their rules for strip-searching women after a Sky News investigation.
And how to catch a silent killer in our homes with help from the family pet.
It's Monday, the 18th of November. Your headlines. The Prime Minister says support for Ukraine is his #1 priority as he arrives in Rio for the G20 summit. Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham hails new rules on strip searches as a landmark moment to improve the safety of women, but some victims say they're still scared of the police. A royal break-in as masked thieves steal farm vehicles from the Windsor Castle estate. Police appeal for information. Plus, leaks, mould and faulty lifts. Life inside a London tower block where residents say they've been abandoned.
We have been suffering. Every week we're sick. I have a 10-year-old that's got breathing problems.
And Wembley winners England beat the Republic of Ireland 5-0 to win promotion in the Nations League. A very good morning to you. The US government says it will allow Ukraine to use American long-range missiles to carry out limited strikes against targets inside Russia. The Conservatives are urging the government here to do the same, but there hasn't yet been an official response from Keir Starmer, who's in Rio for the G20 summit. Well, earlier, a government minister told this programme that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will keep under review the support that is offered to Ukraine. Let's speak to our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who's in Kyiv. And Stuart, the Ukrainians have been seeking this permission for some time. Are they celebrating its arrival?
I think they're pretty pleased. There's no doubting that they have, as you say, been waiting and hoping that this permission would be given to them. The question is, I suppose, will Britain and France follow the United States? My suspicion is they will, probably very soon, because they've been pushing the Biden administration to allow this to happen already. We understand President Biden changed his mind. We know in his cabinet there was a differing opinion on whether they should or shouldn't allow this to happen. It's apparently the arrival of North Korean soldiers to the battlefield that has made him change his mind on the use of these long-range missiles. Reporting from the United States suggests that the permission initially is going to be given to the Ukrainians to fire to protect their positions in Kursk. Now, this is in Russia itself. The Ukrainians took part of the Kursk region in the summer, and that they will use these weapons to target the North Korean soldiers and also Russian soldiers. As many as 50,000 of them are said to be massing to try and take back Kursk. But I think the Ukrainians will hope that they get permission to use them more widely because they want to fire deep into Russia to depots, supply positions that the Russians have purposely put well back from the front line because they know they couldn't be hit. Now they'll be in range of the Ukrainian missile. So it is being celebrated here. President Zelensky hasn't actually said that he's been given permission, but he did say that things have changed. The media is reporting it, and it's going to be the missiles will do what they're meant to do. And the feeling is that those attacks using those missiles will happen quite soon. Now, I would say they have actually had these missiles for a while and they have been able to use them, but they are in relatively short supply, so nobody knows how many they have left. It's believed they do have some left, but how many more will come down from the United States and then perhaps from Britain and France, we don't know, but they are expected to be using them quite soon.
What's the view, Stuart, there as to the timing of all of this? I mean, there are so many moving parts, of course. There was attacks over the weekend. There's the North Korea aspect, but there's also, of course, the US election aspect.
Well, we knew as soon as as Donald Trump won the election, it came straight out of the State Department, also from the White House, that certain budgetary agreements had already been met that allowed for, I think it's between 6 and 9, I think it might be about $8 billion can be used of extra money for Ukraine, and that it became quite clear that the Biden administration was going to make sure that that money was spent and that the arms start arriving here. What happens in terms of when Donald Trump takes over, we really don't know. Some here were pessimistic that he will just literally call it, tell both sides they've got to stop fighting and perhaps give the upper hand to President Putin. But others here are saying, well, maybe not. Maybe he won't want there to be what he would see as a defeat upon him as soon as he takes office, and he may take a harder line with Russia and perhaps arm Ukraine even further. We just don't know. But I think it's no surprise that the administration, the Biden administration, has perhaps been moved to change its position on these missiles. And I think it's probably true, but the arrival of the North Koreans will have definitely had a major impact upon that. I think Ukraine itself has been saying, how come the world isn't actually making more comments about the fact that North Korea is doing this and has joined in the fight? And indeed, it is reported that North Korea may consider sending as many as 100,000 soldiers as part of a defence deal that it signed with Russia. So with those in mind, I think that's why the position by the Biden administration has changed.
Stuart, as always, thanks so much. Stuart Ramsey there for us live in Kyiv. Well, could the UK follow that path? Let's talk to Mario, of course, who's with us here on set. But first, let's listen to what the government had to say on the topic and indeed the Conservatives.
You'll appreciate that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will always keep under review what the Ukrainian people and their military require. And going into the G20, the Prime Minister has set out very clearly that the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have our full backing. That's always been on a cross-party basis in Parliament, and that's the approach we've taken from government to continue that approach.
That was, of course, the Education Secretary and then not James Cartlidge afterwards. The wrong video clip there. But, Mari, the gist here, I mean, this is a topic that clearly both parties are publicly aligned of. Oddly, Labour there were restricted because Bridget Phillipson's in the government. She's not Defence Secretary or Prime Minister, understandably holding her views close to her chest. But we do expect to hear from them today.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got Starmer at the G20 today in Brazil, and so far from number 10 from government, it's been no comment. But the expectation would be once the US has officially confirmed this, because as Stuart was saying, we haven't had that confirmation from the Ukrainians either. Once that is officially kind of admitted to, as it were, then the expectation would be that we would follow suit, perhaps also France as well. But until that moment comes, essentially, Bridget Phillipson is somewhat restricted on what she can say. So she was just trying to kind of reiterate that, you know, the position has not changed and that the UK's support for Ukraine is, you know, unwavering and steadfast, despite the amount of chatter, let's say, about whether a peace deal may need to be reached at some point between Russia and Ukraine because of what's happening in the US and the incoming President Trump and his views on support for Ukraine. But from the clip that we didn't get from James Cartlidge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, he was talking a lot about how he supported this position, he wanted to see this, that he'd been backing it since the summer. And he also talked about how North Korean troops being used against Ukraine in tandem with Russia was a significant escalation as far as he was seeing it, and therefore this is why it warranted this kind of response. So he was very much in favour of it and was saying essentially this is actually really quite a fair retaliation to what Russia has done in terms of stepping up the action in Ukraine. I think the difficulty will always be what happens in a couple of months' time when President Trump comes into power and whether he keeps those or not, and therefore then the impact that has on us and what that means for us and our support for Ukraine. And on a very quick side note, we know that the PM is meeting, having a bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping of China. This is somewhat controversial. Ian Duncan-Smith from the Tory party, for instance, has accused Keir Starmer of kowtowing to the Chinese. For instance, we know he's a big China hawk. He's sanctioned by China and has, wants us to have nothing to do with China. But what Bridget Phillipson was arguing and what we keep hearing from the government is all about this word pragmatism. And what they're trying to say is we might not see eye to eye on everything when it comes to China, but nonetheless, these meetings need to be had in order for us to have some semblance of a relationship, especially when it comes to trade with China. And even James Cartlidge, despite being in opposition, was actually, mirroring and echoing some of that language himself, saying, actually, we need to have these conversations with China, but we just need to be careful about exactly what we say to them and making sure that we raise human rights abuses like that in Hong Kong and also the Uyghur Muslims.
Mari, great stuff. Thanks so much. Now, strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, except as a last resort, following an independent review into the force's treatment of women and girls in police custody. The Dame Vera Baird inquiry was commissioned after a Sky News investigation revealed a series of harrowing stories of women being mistreated by officers. 24 of the 26 recommendations made to Greater Manchester Police have been implemented. That includes an end to so-called welfare strip searches, plus the establishment of an independent scrutiny panel to look at arrests and custody records, and appointing a new super-independent custody visitor to make unannounced visits. That's been welcomed by the report author.
What is particularly impressive on top of that, in my view, is that the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and his deputy, Kate Green, are setting up what I recommended, which is a scrutiny panel to meet and at random to take on arrests, how they've been done, any strip searches, whether they've been done, why they've been done, and to look into all the areas that the chapters of my inquiry found deficient.
Well, as you can see, Jason is here to discuss this in more detail. What did you make of the sort of tone there from Dame Vera?
She seems pleased. I mean, I think, the scrutiny panel is a big thing for Dame Vera. She wanted some sort of other independent oversight of what was going on, and also the ending of welfare strip searches. I think that's another thing that she felt in her report was being abused by the police. I think there is still a question over the complaint system for people, and I'll give you an example of that with one of the Baird case studies, which is a woman was called Sophie. It's not her real name. She was a domestic abuse victim. She was arrested at 3 a.m. in the morning by the police and put in a cell for 11 hours because of allegations made by her abusive partner, who she'd left, that she had broken the wing mirror on his car and caused bruising to his arm on an occasion when he had strangled her. The justification for her arrest by the police at the time was to protect a vulnerable person, being the abusive partner. We can hear from Sophie now.
He's got a history of domestic violence. He's got a history of being incarcerated. They knew what I'd gone through. They knew what I was trying to protect myself from. I was in regular contact with domestic violence support workers who were meeting with police liaison. They knew that I'd had the locks changed. They knew I had an alert on the house and my phone.
So Sophie believed that her partner was using the police as part of his coercive behaviour. Dame Vera agreed. She thought that the arrest was ridiculous, really, and unlawful. And Steve Watson, the Chief Constable, had this to say about it.
The police are being used by a domestic abuser to abuse that woman. That's what happened, isn't it? And how do you feel about it?
Well, I'm appalled by it. I'm appalled by it. I am a professional police officer, and I am surrounded by thousands of good police officers who will simply and similarly be appalled.
There were a lot of people involved in that arrest, and they all got it wrong.
Indeed. It's a systemic failure, a leadership failure, a process failure. I do think in individual circumstances there may be a failure of experience.
So anyone looking at the circumstances would be flabbergasted by the arrest. And yet, a month after Steve Watson gave that interview, when it went through the complaint system, the police complaint said that there was sufficient grounds for the arrest, and they said the service was acceptable. Now, they have since apologised. They have said that it was incorrect, and we've got a statement from the police. GMP say complaints relating to the Baird review, including Sophie's, are subject to a fair and thorough examination without fear or favour by our Professional Standards Directorate. Where an investigation finds there to be a case to answer, we will ensure officers face disciplinary proceedings. We're working hard to ensure that the people of Greater Manchester, particularly women and girls, can have confidence in their police force. But I think an important part of that will be these new regulations that have come in under Dame Vera, and in particular this oversight panel. And it's significant, too, that she's talking to the Home Office tomorrow, she told us, to see if this can become a blueprint for national police forces.
Indeed, very significant indeed. And we'll be speaking to Andy Burnham as well shortly to get his take. Jason, for now, thank you. Time now for all of the day's other stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Detectives investigating the murder of a woman whose body was found in a car boot have launched an international manhunt to find her husband. Ashita Brella was found dead in Ilford in East London early on Thursday, hours after someone in her hometown, Corby, phoned officers with concerns about her welfare. Excuse me. Well, this is the man wanted over the death, Pankaj Lambert. Police believe he's left the country and they're asking anyone with information to come forward. Vulnerable young people are being placed in illegal and unsafe accommodation, such as caravans and Airbnbs, according to a new report into the social care system. Parliament will today consider new measures to stop companies running children's homes from making excessive profits. And it could be finally time to get your woolly jumper out, maybe cashmere, as an Arctic blast is set to hit parts of the UK this week. Snow and ice warnings in place for northern Scotland this morning. And the Met Office has also issued another warning for parts of northern England and southern Scotland from this evening. Australian senators have voted to censor Aboriginal colleague Lydia Thorpe after her protest in front of the King last month. Thorpe shouted, "You're not my king," during a reception in Canberra for the King. The censor described Thorpe's actions as disrespectful and disruptive. This was her reaction.
Censure motion is like that to me. I don't give a damn about censure motion. In fact, I'm going to use it for kindling. And I'm proud that I stood up against the King coloniser.
Masked burglars have reportedly stolen a quad bike and a pickup truck from Windsor Castle estate. The Sun newspaper reporting that the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children were sleeping nearby at the time. Sabah Chowdhury is here with an update. So we had a bit of breaking news, didn't we? We had a bit of confirmation in this case. What do we know?
Yeah, so major security scare at Windsor Castle. 2 men scaled a 6-foot fence on the evening of October the 13th. We know that they broke through a security gate with using a stolen truck. Now, as we understand it, the King himself was not in residence at Windsor Castle at the time, but it's understood that Prince William, his wife, the Princess of Wales and their 3 children were sleeping nearby. Now, Thames Valley Police have said that offenders entered a farm building and made off with a black pickup truck, and they also stole a red quad bike. They went on to say they then made off towards the Old Windsor and Datchet area. So really, this incident is raising questions about how this was allowed to happen. Moving forwards, what will be done to make sure that this never happens again. Now, as it stands, no arrests have been made, but the police have said that an investigation is ongoing.
So, great stuff. Thank you. Now, strip searches are no longer being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, except as a last resort, following an independent review into the forces treatment of women and girls in police custody. I'm joined now by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Very good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Are you satisfied, I guess, with the progress your forces have made in trying to implement some of the recommendations of this report?
Yes, I am, but I'm certainly not complacent. And I would want to begin by saying credit to Sky News for bringing to the fore issues that clearly needed much deeper consideration, to Dame Vera Baird as well, who conducted what was such a thorough inquiry, and mainly, of course, to the people who had the courage to come forward and share their stories. All of that has led to significant changes, particularly what I would describe as a landmark moment in terms of the safety of women in Greater Manchester, which is Greater Manchester Police ending strip searches for what are called welfare reasons, and now bringing in a presumption against strip searches for concealment. So this is very significant change, and I hope it will give confidence to women across Greater Manchester.
There were 2 of the recommendations that you weren't able to implement or not yet. To what extent has that been due to factors outside of your control, whether that's budget or overcrowding pressures or rota problems, and something that you would like to incorporate if, say, there was just more money available?
So we have implemented, or GMP have, I should say, 24 of the 26 recommendations which fell to them. And the reason why it's been difficult to do the final two is for operational reasons. So Dame Vera recommended that, for instance, there should always be a female welfare officer appointed to any woman when she's in custody, and that that officer should always answer when the woman presses the buzzer. They're saying that while they'll do that in the vast majority of cases, it's not possible to do it in every occasion just because of operational issues and staffing issues. Similarly, it's just not possible to say that there could never be a woman-only space, a cell used for a male prisoner. Operational reasons will mean that might have to happen on occasion. So those are the only caveats, and I hope people will understand the reasons for those things. Otherwise, there is a substantial body of change coming through here. And as I say, I go back to the reasons why I commissioned this report. I was shocked, like anybody, when I saw that Sky News report. I didn't know of those situations at the time. We brought in Dame Vera on the back of that report, and I think it's not just changing things in Greater Manchester. I'm hearing that police forces across England and Wales now are looking at the Baird inquiry and also considering making changes themselves. And that, as I say, should do something, I hope, to lift the confidence levels of women in police across the country.
Mr. Burnham, Jason Farrell here. You know about the case of Sophie, who was featured in the Baird inquiry, and I've told you about her, how she was arrested in the middle of the night by officers over allegations made by her partner, who was abusive to her. And Dame Vera concluded that the arrest was unlawful, and we heard from Stephen Watson, Chief Constable, saying that it was appalling treatment. And yet, a month after that, she gets a letter from the Complaints Service saying that her treatment was acceptable. Is that not just symptomatic of a complaint system that is deaf to mistakes being made by the police?
Well, I was very disappointed, Jason, to hear what had happened. And clearly it says that we can't be complacent, as I said at the start of the interview. When it was brought to the Deputy Mayor's attention, she made an intervention, and it's now been acknowledged by GMP that it wasn't handled properly. The new system had not fully been bedded in all of our districts, because a case like that should have been reviewed, and it wasn't. So it points to the fact that we've got to be vigilant to make sure all of these changes are implemented right throughout GMP at every single level of the force, and we will be, and we're happy to come on Sky to account for that at any time. As I said, you did a big public service in bringing these issues and the cases that featured in the original report into the public domain. It was a very important thing, and I hope viewers will recognise that myself and the Deputy Mayor, Kate Green, we acted quickly and seriously. We believe this wasn't any other report. This needed different attention, and we have given it that attention. I think the ending of strip searches for welfare reasons in Greater Manchester is a massive moment, and it shouldn't be underestimated. And that change, I think, sends the signal right throughout the system as to how I and the Deputy Mayor consider these things, and the paramount importance of women's dignity and safety when they're in custody in Greater Manchester.
It is a big moment, that, Mr. Burnham, and a lot of women will be pleased to hear that, and particularly the people involved in the Baird review. And we heard what Dame Vera described as horror stories of what had happened to certain women. When we asked Greater Manchester Police how many people have been disciplined or dismissed as a result of the Baird inquiry, so far none. Does that worry you that so far nobody, out of the entire Baird review, no one's been disciplined?
Well, as we've just discussed, it's still being worked through, so the consequences of it are still being investigated. But if you look at this Chief Constable's record, over 100 officers have been removed from the force since he since he took up office. So, you know, there is no suggestion there that things are ignored. Quite the opposite. In fact, he's taken a very robust approach on these matters. And more broadly, we're still bringing in changes, Jason. So Dame Vera recommended an independent scrutiny panel drawn of people with experience in the criminal justice system to have oversight of custody in Greater Manchester and the arrests that are made and the lawfulness of them. So that panel has now been recruited. It will begin its work next month. So there will be a new layer of independent oversight of custody and arrest. So I hope you'll accept that we continue to make these changes, but we've provided this update because already there is significant progress, particularly the ending of strip searches. That is a big deal. And I would like to see that implemented across England and Wales. I personally I thought very carefully about this on the back of the cases that you broadcast, and obviously talked to people, considered the issues myself. I am not comfortable at all with a woman being strip searched in custody. I don't think it is personally necessary, and it's why I asked Greater Manchester Police to consider only doing it in the most extreme of circumstances, where there was a concern about a concealed item, but more broadly there being a presumption against it, and ending them completely for what people call welfare reasons. So this is a big change for us. I would say it's a change should go around the country. I don't think a woman ever recovers from a strip search. It will be something that scars her for the rest of her life. She will always have cause to think back to it. I don't think it should be happened, particularly when some of the women who were strip searched shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. So we have done some real soul searching here. We've come up with some big changes, but we will never be complacent, and we will continue to monitor all of the issues that your reports raised and that Dame Vera recommended. Andy Burnham, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Jason, just a quick follow-up. Thank you. If this does get rolled out around the rest of the country, that would be significant?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we only looked at Greater Manchester Police, but it would be naive to think that this is a thing that isn't happening in other forces. And if it's right in Greater Manchester that you don't strip search someone for welfare reasons, and I think the feeling was that it was a power that was being abused, and also a lot of women who come into custody, I'm afraid, unfortunately, can be the victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse. I mean, a lot of the women in our prison service are victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse. So it's not surprising then that these are often, even if they have committed a crime, and in some of these cases they hadn't, but even if they have committed a crime, you might be, re-traumatising them by strip searching them. And as Dame Vera pointed out, if someone is vulnerable, and if you do think they've got welfare issues, actually, probably the last thing you want to do is remove all their clothes. So I think the Mayor of Manchester is right that this is something that should be considered on a national level.
Jason, great stuff. Thanks so much, Jason Farrell there. We've got a little bit of breaking news crossing relating to that decision, expected decision from the US to give Ukraine permission to use long-range weapons into Russian territory. These reports coming from the Kremlin saying that Russia and Putin have made our position very clear. If such a decision has been made by the United States, then it will mean that if Western weapons are fired deep into Russia, that this will be considered an act of those countries. I'm just trying to catch the last line of that. Then this, obviously, the outgoing administration in the United States wants to throw oil on the fire and escalate the conflict in Ukraine. This will not be Ukraine doing the targeting, but those countries which gave permission. That's the key line there, of course, coming from reports coming from the Kremlin. We'll have more on this in our next interview after this short break, when we talk to Sir Peter Westmacott, the former ambassador to the United States. That and a lot more still to come.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We're going to talk about all the latest foreign policy developments with Sir Peter Westmacott in just a moment. He's here with me on set. But first, let's get a report from our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett. Ivor, we just reported some of those lines coming out of the Kremlin in terms of responding to this US decision. Break it down for us.
Yeah, this was Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin's official spokesman, speaking to journalists on his daily press call. And obviously he was asked about it. He countered by saying that the Kremlin hasn't had any official confirmation that the US has given this permission. But after that, he did go on to give the usual kind of anger warnings and accusations that we have come to expect from Moscow when we have seen these kind of developments. So, for example, he said that if this decision has been taken by the United States, this will usher in a new round of tension, he said. He also said that it would mean the involvement of the United States in the conflict. And finally, he said, it is obvious that the outgoing administration, in the eyes of Moscow, this is, of course, wants to throw oil on the fire and escalate the conflict in Ukraine. So the usual kind of rhetoric we've come to expect. And he also referred journalists to Vladimir Putin's remarks he made on this issue back in September when he said that if this permission is given for Kyiv to use US long-range missiles to strike deeper inside Russia, it would mean, in Russia's eyes, NATO's direct involvement in the conflict, be in a direct fight with Russia, he said. And he said Moscow would be forced to take appropriate decisions. The question is, what could those decisions be? What could Russia's response actually be? In the past, again, on this issue, Vladimir Putin has raised the prospect of potentially sending weapons to other countries, Western adversaries, to strike Western targets abroad. He's never mentioned any countries specifically, but the assumption has been that he's referring to Iran, who Russia has become much closer with over the past 6 months and developed stronger ties. He's also recently changed Russia's nuclear doctrine, that's happened in the last couple of months, to allow Russia, in theory, to respond with nuclear weapons if Western weapons fall on Russian soil. But will Russia actually do this, or is this just more saber-rattling? The calculus in Washington, D.C. seems to be that this is another bluff from Russia, because Other so-called red lines from Moscow has been crossed before in this conflict. I'm referring, of course, to the deployment of Western missiles to Ukraine earlier on in the conflict. Also, they've sent battle tanks and fighter jets to Kyiv without any escalation. And the thinking in Washington, in the White House, seems to be, if this is the case, that this is this is the same again, that they can do this without consequence. I think a more pertinent question might be, is this actually going to have the desired effect on the battlefield? Will it make any difference at all? Because there is a thinking among Western diplomats who I've spoken to here in the past couple of months on this issue, and that is that the dithering on the deployment of this, on allowing this permission, has allowed Russia to move the stockpiles of weapons, drones and missiles that Ukraine wants to hit with these missiles deeper inside Russia, potentially out of range. So if that's the case, it might not have the desired effect. And another question, of course, is what will happen when President Biden is replaced by President Trump? Will this permission remain in place?
Ivor, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for that. Let's discuss it all with the former British ambassador to the US, Sir Peter Westmacott. Very good morning to you, Sir Peter.
Morning.
Do you think the UK will follow suit with the permission?
The problem we've got is that the Storm Shadow missiles that we've got, the cruise missiles, which at the moment are not authorised to be used to go into Russian territory, same position as the French equivalent, which is called Scalp, but it's essentially the same thing, is that they are subject to US approval because there are some US components in those cruise missiles. So unless the United States government says OK, under the terms of the delivery of those components to our weapons manufacturers, we can't actually do it. So it's not just a sovereign decision for the British and the French governments. It does require a green light from the US authorities.
But given the US permissions pending for their own ATACMS weapons, is it not likely that we will give our permissions to?
I would have thought logically, yes. But I think you'll find that the MOD, or whoever it is going to take the decision here, will want to be clear that they are not transgressing whatever the terms are of the delivery of those components. But logically, it should mean that there is now a green light for the Storm Shadow and Scalp to be used in the same way.
Do you think that it will be a game changer in this conflict, or as Ivor was saying, has it been too slow to arrive?
I think there's been a legitimate complaint that a lot of the kit we have provided for the Ukrainians took too long to get there, which allowed the Russians to consolidate, to prepare, to get their defensive positions properly prepared. Will it make a big difference? It depends to some extent how many missiles we've got available. Our stocks are not very high. I think some of the Kremlin response is bluster. They were bound to say that sort of stuff. But it's a bit rich for them to say that this would be an escalation when they've got 10,000 North Korean troops coming in to help them fight on Ukrainian territory. So I think there's a certain amount of making our flesh creep. I doubt whether we're looking at theatre nuclear weapons. That would be a horrific additional step. The Chinese will not want the Russians to do that. And I'm told by the military experts that it doesn't actually help them militarily if they started to use nuclear weapons, of which, by the way, the radioactive fallout would land very largely on Russian people.
In terms of the timing of all of this, the North Korean factor, I guess, is being used by the US. But is it also fairly weak of President Biden to make this announcement if it was the right thing to do after his election?
My guess is that he was a bit reluctant before the election to do anything which allowed the Republicans to accuse him of escalation. We also know that President Biden has always been a bit averse to taking military action. He didn't like doing more in Afghanistan. He thought he was rolled by the military way back in 2009 over surge when he was the vice president. So he's instinctively not a particularly aggressive kind of guy. On the other hand, he is still the president of the United States. He does feel very strongly that if there's going to be some sort of negotiated deal about the future of Ukraine, that the Ukrainians have got to have some chips on the table and not to be left with absolutely nothing to negotiate when it comes to that moment. So personally, I think it's legitimate. Donald Trump and his team may complain a bit about it, but he is still the president until the 20th of January.
Obviously, President Biden did meet with President Xi Jinping just a couple of days ago at the APEC summit, perhaps warning him that he was about to make this decision as it relates to Russia. And obviously, he did also meet with President-elect Trump last week. I mean, is it possible this is coordinated between the outgoing president and the incoming president, or is that wildly wishful thinking?
The readout that we heard of the meeting with incoming President Donald Trump was pretty banal. It was, peaceful transition of power, and we will be helpful and we will be responsible Democrats. I would be surprised if there was much policy discussion of that sort. I'd be even more surprised if there was coordination on Ukraine, Russia, because fundamentally, Donald Trump has been in a very different position in terms of his general support and understanding of Putin's position on almost everything and on the need to, if you like, get out of Ukraine, whereas Biden has been much firmer on that. I'd be surprised, but if there is a degree of coordination, you know, putting the chips on the table so that there can be a more meaningful negotiation, great. But I think it's unlikely.
In terms of the sort of President-elect's administration, how it's shaping up, obviously we've had almost all the major positions have at least a nominee so far, still waiting for Treasury. What's your take on the headline positions, and particularly those that will affect us here in the UK?
The first few that were announced, I think, produced sighs of relief, if you like.
You're talking about Rubio,
yeah, Rubio,
Waltz,
Susan Wiles, Chief of Staff. You know, all those people were known quantities, competent, and, if you like, well qualified for the job. But the next wave, I think, has caused a degree of alarm even in some Republican circles. And so you've got Pete Hegseth, who was who was one of the Trump anchors, and somebody who's sort of anti the military establishment and so on, who's going to be defense secretary. He was a veteran, but he was never a very senior officer. You've got Matt Gaetz, who was a kind of bomb thrower in the Congress, and who, like Trump, was investigated for drugs and sexual peccadillos and other problems, and has a sort of grievance, if you like, against congressional investigation like Donald Trump has. You've got RFK Kennedy, put in charge of Health and Human Services, who is an anti-vaxxer and a conspiracy theorist. You've got Tulsi Gabbard going to be charged of national intelligence, who is a known Russia hawk and supporter of if you like, dictators. These are all people who are almost a kind of personification of some of Donald Trump's own grievances about the current way of doing things. So those are causing a degree of concern. It may even be that one or two of the more, if you like, extreme ones, like Matt Gaetz, won't get through Senate confirmation. Slightly more alarmingly is the fact that Trump seems to be saying, I'd like the Senate to go into recess so that I can skip the confirmation process for my appointees, and they can all just go through on the nod. That would be quite an alarming break with the tradition of checks and balances and Congress being allowed to approve senior appointments of an incoming president.
It's interesting. I mean, it would be an extraordinary step if they did it via recess. On the flip side, traditionally, even if certain senators have great grievances with a nominee, because of the sort of process of it coming fresh off an election victory, most of the time, appointments do get through with rather big majorities because the other side sort of says, yes, I'm not saying I vote to agree with every single position that this individual in front of me takes, but I'm voting to say that they're OK ultimately and they fit with the person that's just won the election. So I guess it could go either way, this. But I mean, what certainly is interesting is if a couple of them were rejected and recess was used after that.
It could go either way, and it's very likely that both houses are now going to be very much doing what Donald Trump would like them to do. Nevertheless, one or two of these appointments or proposed appointments are fairly egregious, and there are signs that some of the Republican senators don't really want to approve them all, particularly Gaetz. Gaetz could be a kind of discard in the event if Donald Trump's not really his nature, but if he chose that he ought to park one in order to get the rest of them through, it would probably be Gaetz.
In terms of kind of clear positions, going back to Waltz, Rubio, the ones that you sort of framed as relatively sensible picks, they're very clearly China hawks. The Prime Minister today is expected to hold a one-on-one with President Xi Jinping. Do you think we're going to run into trouble in the next couple of years if we try and increase our relationship with the Chinese in light of a Trump administration?
I think there's several areas of foreign policy where the UK is going to have to be quite careful. We're going to have to be careful as we reset our relations with the European Union and at the same time try to persuade the Trump administration not to penalise us too much with these new tariffs that they want to put on. You know, how are we going to manage that? I think it can be done, but it's going to require some agility and some nimble footwork. On China, today we've got Keir Starmer, who's going to meet Xi Jinping at Rio at the G20 summit. He's obviously signalling that he wants to have a better relationship with China. Is that going to get us into difficulty with the Trump team? I think we've got to wait and see where that goes. I mean, China is not the same kind of immediate military threat to neighbours, even though it is flexing its muscles in the South China Sea, as Russia is. So I think, and China, by the way, supplies an awful lot of low-cost as well as mid-level technology to American consumers as well as European consumers. We actually need China to be part of the global economy, but they need to play by rules that the rest of us find acceptable. I think there's scope there for getting it right, but it will require, as I say, some nimble diplomacy.
And just a final question, Peter. What did you think of the fact that Chancellor Scholz of Germany, of course, who's facing elections himself in the new year, held a phone call with Vladimir Putin over the last week or so. Is that unacceptable, or is it par for the course in modern diplomacy?
I saw a lot of his critics screamed appeasement and Munich and all the rest of it. You know, President Macron had a long conversation with Putin just before he invaded Ukraine to try and dissuade him from doing that, and he got a certain amount of criticism. My own view was that it was right to try. We knew that Putin was lying when he said he wasn't planning to invade. All the evidence was there, but I think it was right to try and dissuade him from doing it. Schulz, who after all, Germany and his government have been quite close to Russia over the years, very dependent on Russian gas, very dependent on Russian markets for their exports. They have got a kind of special relationship with Russia. So making a phone call in order to try to persuade him to give up on the invasion, or at least to start having a more open mind to the idea of freezing the conflict, personally, I don't find that offensive, but it was politically risky at a time when, of course, Chancellor Schulz is in a very weak position.
Sir Peter, it was always a pleasure. Great to see you. Sir Peter Westmacott there with all of the perspective on the issues at hand. Let's go back to our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett. Ivor, do you think that that there is going to be a greater level of antagonism to individual countries if and when permissions are granted? And, of course, all eyes, of course, on Starmer today if he follows suit, as Biden is expected to confirm.
Well, I think the answer your guest there gave on Russia's reaction was very interesting, calling it more bluster from the Kremlin. The exact phrase was designed to make our flesh creep. I think that really echoes the kind of sentiment that I've been hearing from Western diplomats here, and I think it reflects the thinking by White House officials and the Biden administration in coming to this decision, if indeed it's true, because I think Russia has made so many of these threats, not just collectively to NATO and the collective West, as it likes to term it, but also to individual countries, to the UK, to France, when they were talking about this issue back in May and June time, that they have to now make these threats again. They can't, it's part of the script now, because the audience isn't just those abroad, but it's also those domestically. A lot of this kind of messaging is actually aimed to the Russian public, of course. They want to ensure that the Russian public continues to buy into the Kremlin's narrative that this war is a defensive war for Russia, that they are the innocent parties, that they are the one under attack from NATO, from the West, and that's why they make these kind of threats, calling this an escalation from the US, with no mention of North Korean troops or reports of North Korean troops, thousands of them being deployed to Ukraine. And that's why the usual kind of hawks and hardliners you hear from a lot in Moscow when these kind of issues are discussed have been deployed in force, with a number of high-profile Russian MPs saying this is could lead to World War III, talk of serious consequences again, but only nebulous serious consequences again. Not very clear on what could actually happen, but Russia, of course, has many things at its disposal, of course, with fears of potentially further sabotage and cyber attacks too, which the West accuses of Russia of doing already.
Ivor, as always, thanks so much, Ivor Bennett, for us there live in Moscow. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll be right back with the latest news.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back, welcome back. Well, as you can see, we have two very special guests with us for this last segment. Caroline Allen, the Chief Veterinary Officer at the RSPCA, and we were just discussing this, Caroline, you won't mind me saying, the most important guest of all, upstaging us all, is...
Fig.
Fig, and who is Fig?
So Fig is a 14-month-old miniature schnauzer.
And reason we're all here to talk about this particular topic is because of carbon monoxide being... What, a silent killer in homes? Explain a little bit more about this.
That's right. So the RSPCA have teamed up with the Gas Safety Register for Carbon Monoxide Awareness Week. And that's because, actually, carbon monoxide is a danger to all the family. And, in fact, our pets are most vulnerable to the effects of the potentially silent killer.
And, of course, Caroline, humans and pets will pick up the same symptoms if there is any kind of leak in the home. But how are pets being used to help owners ahead of time, potentially?
Well, I mean, the biggest help, of course, is to get a carbon monoxide alarm and to make sure that you're having your appliances annually sort of checked. But the issue with pets is because they are smaller and because they potentially spend more time in the home, they can actually be affected first.
So carbon monoxide, if it's an issue, obviously anyone would, I presume, empty the whole house. This is if a human doesn't notice that there is an issue, but pets might be more affected by it?
Yeah, so pets can sort of be the first warning sign of an issue if you don't have a monitor. So the sort of symptoms that we would see would be drowsiness, obviously more than usual, but also incoordination, so sort of wobbly, irritable behaviour, particularly maybe if they go outside, they seem better because they're breathing in fresh air and they don't want to go back in. But also something that's sort of quite a cardinal sign is that the membranes, so sort of around the eye and on the lips, will go a deep red colour. And that's something that you might notice. And obviously, get straight out of the house into fresh air. If the pet is unwell, contact your vet. But definitely get in touch with, there is an emergency line for sort of concerns around gas safety. So give that line a call if you have any concerns.
I have to say, Fig is so well behaved.
I know, he's just 14 months.
14 months, it's amazing. And I suppose, your whole message, Caroline, is that people will spend thousands, won't they, on pets, vets bills. But actually a device to seek out a leak in the home is, what, £20?
It's a £20 device and it's going to protect the whole family. And, we know that, pets, they are, such an important part of our family and we love them so much.
Well, I think you've done it the right way because often people wouldn't buy the device, even though it's £20 just to protect ourselves. But I think to protect the likes of Fig, people will be off to buy one straight away. Caroline, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Great to see you. Right, we're going to have a quick look at the weather before we leave you. And cold Arctic air sweeping south across the country will reach all parts midweek. However, a low-pressure system from the Atlantic is likely to give some snow for northern England this evening and overnight. It's a cold start to the day over northern and eastern parts. Temperatures in rural spots are widely sub-zero with a frost for many. Cloud and rain over southern and western areas will keep it mild there. Early sunshine in the northeast will turn hazy as cloud increases from the southwest. That's your weather. It's a difficult act to follow, Mari. Switching focus back to the serious news of the day. So all eyes on the G20 and the PM meeting with Xi Jinping.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Ukraine situation is going to dominate because of the US news that came through last night about those missiles being allowed to be used on Russia. But the meeting with Xi Jinping is really actually quite seismic for several reasons. It's the first in 6 years, but also Keir Starmer is really trying to make sure that his government is focusing on pragmatism and making sure that they promote British interests abroad. So whenever he's on these foreign trips, often you'll see the press releases that come through. There's always quite a detailed explanation of how this is good for people back at home, how this benefits people at home. And that is because they are acutely aware of any, whiff of criticism of him, jetting off too much and not being home enough. And what he's trying to say is this is actually going to benefit us all if we can get, talks on trade, talks on security, etc. So I think it will be quite a consequential bilateral meeting today. We'll have to see how it goes and what the readout we get is after, because we know that obviously there are concerns about China's stance on, human rights abuses and things like that.
And how long is he over there for this
so the G20 is for 2 days, and then he'll be back. Interestingly as well, we're going to be hopefully getting some information from the Home Office later this week as well on some new announcements. So there's lots to come in politics.
Mari, as always, thanks so much. That does it for Mari, Leah and me on The Breakfast Show. Kay will be back tomorrow, and Gareth is up next.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
This is Sky News Today. It's 10 o'clock. The headlines this hour. Warning to the West, the Kremlin reacts to Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use long-range US missiles inside Russia. The Prime Minister sets his sights on a pragmatic relationship with China as he plans to meet President Xi at the G20. Police strip searches. Greater Manchester Police make a change following an investigation by Sky News home editor Jason Farrell. Mould and leaks making tenants sick. Sky News reports on a housing crisis from an East London council tower block.
I feel like something bad has to happen to me and my two girls. Then I feel like maybe they will take this serious.
Weather warnings. The UK braces for snow, ice and power cuts in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We'll tell you what to expect. Very good morning to you. We start with developing news on the war in Ukraine. In the past hour, the Kremlin has warned that any decision by Joe Biden to allow Ukraine to attack targets inside Russia with US long-range missiles would lead to a rise in tension and deepen America's involvement in the conflict. It follows reports from the US that Mr. Biden has decided to allow the move just 2 months before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. And it comes as Russian attacks intensify. An overnight Russian strike on a residential building in the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy has killed 11 people. So what do we know about these US-supplied missiles? Well, the Army Tactical Missile System, commonly known as ATACMS, are some of the most powerful so far provided to Ukraine, capable of travelling up to 186 miles. They were first provided by the US for the first time last October, but they hadn't been authorised for use inside Russia. Ukraine could likely first target Russian military bases around the Kursk region, where Ukrainian forces have occupied territory since August. It's also where Russia has been deploying North Korean troops to supplement its own forces. And British and French militaries could also follow suit. They've given the Ukrainians a limited number of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, which have a range of about 155 miles. That's less than the American missile system. Well, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports from Brazil, where world leaders will have the Ukraine on the top of the agenda as they meet for the G20 summit.
A new Russian onslaught across Ukraine. Missiles and drones strike critical infrastructure in the biggest attack in months. Amid the carnage, though, a breakthrough in American military support. US President Joe Biden has finally agreed to allow Ukraine to fire long-range US missiles against targets inside Russia. Ukraine's leader signalled their use is just a matter of time.
Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions. But strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will.
But Joe Biden's decision comes just weeks before Donald Trump returns to the White House. A man who's vowed to end the war quickly, though without saying how. The major shift in US policy is apparently in part in response to this. North Korea sending troops to fight for Russia. Here they're pictured preparing to move forward. The North Koreans are thought to be helping Russian forces repel a Ukrainian assault into the Kursk region of Russia. That could be where the US missiles are used first. Then the next question will be how the Kremlin responds. Something that will surely be discussed on the sidelines of a meeting of world leaders due to take place here in Brazil amid tight security. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly warned the West they'd be playing with fire if they allowed Ukraine to use their long-range missiles inside Russia, even saying it could start a global conflict. US and British officials have cautioned against listening to Moscow's threats. Russia's war divides global opinion, with Western allies pitched against Moscow and its friends. Back on the ground in Ukraine, though, yet more suffering from another Russian strike. This country will surely be hoping the UK and others will now follow America's lead, so its forces can be free to fight back harder. Deborah Hames, Sky News, Brazil.
Well, in a moment, we'll hear from our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who's in Kyiv for us. First, though, let's head to Moscow. Our correspondent, Ivor Bennett, is there. And Ivor, the Kremlin's saying that if Western weapons are fired into Russia, that it won't be Ukraine doing the targeting, but the countries that gave permission, an indication of Russian ire and frustration in this situation. What else has the Kremlin been saying?
Yes, we've had the Kremlin's reaction, and it's what you might expect. Anger, warnings and accusations. If this decision has been made by the United States, this will usher in a new round of tension. Those were the words of Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin's chief spokesman. He also said that if it will mean the involvement of the United States in the Ukraine conflict, referring to the fact that Russia believes that it's not just going to be Ukrainian military that will going to be operating these systems, but US military combatants who will be providing the know-how and the technical expertise and operations if they are deployed. And he also said that it's obvious in the eyes of the Kremlin that the Biden administration wants to throw oil, he said, on the fire and escalate the conflict in Ukraine. No mention of the perceived escalation in the Western eyes of Russia deploying thousands of North Korean troops, reports of North Korean troops to the front in Russia's Kursk region to help them on the battlefield. Dmitry Peskov also referred journalists to Vladimir Putin's remarks on this issue back in September when he said if permission is given to use US long-range weapons deeper inside Russia, then it would mean NATO's direct involvement in the conflict and that Russia would be forced to respond with appropriate decisions. They never spelt out what those decisions could be, but in the past, Vladimir Putin has spoken about the potential deployment of weapons to other countries, Western adversaries, to target Western targets abroad. Again, never specified which countries, but the assumption is that he might be talking there about Iran. Recently, of course, Moscow has also updated its nuclear doctrine, which is the legal framework which allows it to use, which dictates when and how Russia could use nuclear weapons. Updated it to allow it, in theory, to respond with nukes if US or foreign missiles fall on Russian soil. The question is this a bluff? Is it more saber-rattling, or is it the real thing? In the eyes of Washington, it seems this is another bluff by Moscow, because previous Russian red lines have, of course, been crossed in this conflict without consequence when the West has supplied missiles to Kyiv, battle tanks, fighter jets. All have happened without any escalation. And Washington, the White House, seems to believe that that will happen again. I think the question is, will this actually make a difference on the battlefield? There is a sense among Western diplomats here in Moscow, who I've spoken to, that the dithering on this issue has allowed Russia to move the stockpiles of missiles and drones that Ukraine wants to strike with these weapons deeper inside Russia, out of range. Another question is, of course, what will happen when President Biden is replaced by President Trump? Will this permission remain in place?
Ivor, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's just bring in Stuart. And Stuart, Ivor, they're mentioning these ditherings, these bluffs on the part of Russia. For Ukraine, that's led to almost now 1,000 days of war on its territory. It's led to overnight another 11 people killed in the city of Sumy. What is the situation on the ground? And from a Ukrainian perspective, whilst this will be welcomed news, as Ivor alludes to, it's not a huge game changer, is it?
No, it probably isn't, though I say it is significant. It may not be a game changer, but certainly here in Ukraine it's been welcomed. They've been asking for it to happen for a very long time now. The sense you get here, and it's an interesting one because pretty much everyone says it, is that Ukraine has been armed by the West, by the United States, given support, but just enough to hold on, never enough to actually take the fight to the Russians and perhaps to even beat them and win. And that is, you hear all the time from people in the street, but also from the military itself and from commanders that I've been with for the last 2 weeks. They just don't have enough to go over that edge to push the Russians back. And they're hoping that this perhaps will be the start of a change of that. We know in the Kursk region they're already under considerable pressure from Russian forces, and we also have heard as many as 50,000 with those North Koreans could be trying to take back territory that the Ukrainians took in the summer in Kursk. So any type of long-distance weapon will be wanted. They'll hope that the UK and France follow suit as well, and then they can identify perhaps new targets. As I was saying, they may well have moved them around, but they can find them again, I'm sure. These are very sophisticated weapons and very accurate, so they'll want to attack those positions. Also airstrips, because so much attacks taking place, as we saw in Sumy, is being launched from Russia, and they want to take out those areas as well using these weapons. So here, it's been welcomed. It may not be the ultimate game changer, but it's certainly going to be good for morale and could make a big difference, I think.
Joining us from Kyiv, Stuart, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Just want to step away from the situation in Ukraine to bring you some breaking news now. This is coming to us from the Metropolitan Police. Let's just bring you an update from them. They say that 2 Met officers have been charged with sexual assault. They were charged with 4 counts of sexual assault on a woman. That's Police Constables Jerome Beasley, who's 41, and Luke Robinson, aged 39, both attached to the Central West Command Unit. They allegedly sexually assaulted a woman at a venue in W1, that's central London, on Sunday, the 21st of April. They were off duty at the time, the Metropolitan Police adds, and the Directorate of Professional Standards is aware. Goes on to say, this release from the Metropolitan Police, that both officers are currently suspended from duty and scheduled to appear at Westminster's Magistrates Court on Wednesday, the 20th of November. So that breaking news, in the past few moments, 2 Met officers charged with sexual assault. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. Let's just turn our attention back to Ukraine and Russia, because President Putin's previously warned that by allowing Ukraine to use long-range Western weapons to fire into Russia, that could trigger a global war. The Russian politician Maria Butina, an ally of Vladimir Putin, has been among the first to comment on President Biden's move. She said these guys, Biden's administration, are trying to escalate the situation to the maximum while they still have power and are still in office. I have a great hope that Trump will overcome this decision, and it's been made because they are seriously risking the start of World War III, which is not in anybody's interest. Well, here in the UK, the Minister, Bridget Phillipson, has reiterated the UK government's support for Ukraine. That's as the conflict approaches 1,000 days.
You'll appreciate that the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary will always keep under review what the Ukrainian people and their military require. And going into the G20, the Prime Minister has set out very clearly that the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky have our full backing. That's always been on a cross-party basis in Parliament, and that's the approach we've taken from government to continue that approach.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, G20 leaders are gathering in Brazil, including representatives from Russia. Sir Keir Starmer has been giving his thoughts on the issue of Ukraine, and our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has more now from Rio de Janeiro.
The US missile news emerged as global leaders from the group of 20 economic powers gather here in Rio de Janeiro, where the war in Ukraine will surely be discussed. While this is a significant shift in US policy when it comes to that war, it's important not to get carried away. The granting to the Ukrainians the ability to use American ballistic missiles against targets inside Russia is not going to win the war. It is, though, going to expand the capacity of the Ukrainians to strike important military targets much deeper inside Russia. And it sends an important signal to the Kremlin that the US has not been